camera during your countdown? Because I noticed this with other hosts, that sometimes they're on camera fading in. Okay, so that's, so I probably make dumb faces then every time you do that.
I do that sometimes.
I'll make them more handsome too. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tip-Off, the show that sets the stage for the day's NBA, MLB, all the plays out there you need to know for the 3-game NBA, 6-game MLB slate tonight. And as you may be able to tell, I am not Kayla Kinnear, nor am I Eitan Shander. I am, in fact, Chris Spags, joined by the man who is always with me and usually with Kayla on these Thursday shows. He is the prop bet king. He is the doctor of all the money out there. He's Ben Rasa. How you doing, Ben?
I'm all right, dude. What's going on? Yeah, it's just you and me here. We'll have to carry on as a 2-man team today, but we're going to be just fine. We got the playoffs. We've got some baseball. We've got, I guess there's some other stuff to talk about, but we'll stick to the main points today and breeze on through this show. It's going to be a good one.
Today, it is just a 30-minute tip-off, or really more a 27-minute show before we get into the NBA Deeper Dive and the NBA Live Before Lock show. So you can stay tuned on the stream to get those coming up in a little bit here. And in fact, you can get me on the Live Before Lock show with my pal Greg Ehrenberg running it back one more time today as well as part of this feed. But right now, make sure you guys hit that like button, please. It helps us out a bunch. And also subscribe to the channel, because even though it is a holiday weekend, if you have any downtime between whatever travel you might be doing, any barbecuing, any fun, any, binge drinking out on the beach somewhere, just hang out with us here. We're going to be doing shows all weekend long. Hopefully not on Monday, but we'll find out about that coming up soon. But we will have a lot going on. I will be on some shows tomorrow as well as Saturday. We have all the NBA playoff content going on, MLB content going on. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel and check it out. And of course, make sure to go check out our sponsor, No House Advantage, who's taking a different spin on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across the NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. And it is exclusively a peer-to-peer fantasy sports platform that levels the playing field and makes it easier for you to win real cash compared to your traditional DFS sites. They have over 500 player prop offerings on a given day. No House Advantage is the largest offer of player props in the industry. The best part is you get yourself a $20 first match deposit bonus when you use the promo code Awesemo. So go beat your friends, not the house. Download in the App Store and win big with player props today. But then it would not be a tip-off whether Kayla's here, whether Eitan's here, whoever's here. We got to talk about our bad beats. And yesterday saw some more playoff dominance and I guess some popcorn and spit thrown from guys like the Sixers in particular. We've also got the MLB, and you've got the Charles Schwab going. So how did it go yesterday / how's it going today?
No, today's the golf world's a little off the rails. Spieth was on fire. A lot of ugly performances. Course played a lot more difficult than I thought, but it's just 18 holes in, so I'm not going to overreact to that. Just like when I ended the golf show last night, I tried not to overreact to the Knicks' inept first half. I was very upset. It seemed hopeless, and then the Garden and Randall and the team and Rose, and seemingly his 50 minutes Tibbs is going to kill him, but we did need it last night. They got it done. That was really crucial for me. I bet the Knicks last night. Everything else, Spags, to me, it was pretty, not surprising to see the Sixers and Utah, who absolutely had to have the game with Mitchell coming back. What did you make of the slate last night with the 3 games?
So NBA, I've sort of rallied, and it's weird because for me with the playoffs, I do think it's resulted in some changes to my process where I've talked about it on some of the shows where I was using just pretty much strictly boom bust ratings for a period that was actually killing towards the end of the regular season because all the random guys that were coming into the mix, you can project them fairly well. And I was doing a good job of that, but sort of learning how to balance and counterbalance the ownership relative to their chances of getting there was a big help to me. But in the playoffs, the ownership has been so efficient for players and also just so all over the board where guys will end up, a little bit lower than they should be according to the ownership projections. Guys will end up significantly over-owned, where I've just been going back to my original process of just running the best 2,000 lineups, sorting them out and going with it. It's been working pretty well, except on days like yesterday where it was sort of such an obvious lineup that ended up winning it that I think a lot of people ended up cutting it out. And I know we're going to get to all the things that we talk about normally, but Ben, you're so good with strategy that I'll ask you a quick question where if you are seeing some of these lineups win recently, where it was a top 2 split in the NBA on DK yesterday of 2 guys splitting the whatever 100 and change that was going out, 100K and change. But are you a little more willing to play closer to optimal lineups than usual these days? I don't know if it's different for golf, but the ownership is so efficient for NBA that it seems to me like sometimes you get guys who like just project well that end up a bit underowned for the playoffs in particular. And it's been throwing me for a loop because it does seem 150 maxers having a tough time out there. So I don't have any thoughts about the strategy as fields do get sharp and really sharpen up in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so I do think NBA in particular is unique like that because, during the regular season, one of the big edges is reacting, and that's why we do these shows, to the ever never-ending injury news and some of these teams that are resting guys on back-to-backs and whatnot. When the playoffs get here, A, you have a short slate, so you only have a couple of pivots at each range, and B, the rotations are what they are. Like, blowout risk is mitigated, and there's not that much. So I do feel what happens is some people are in a regular season mindset where they think they have to almost be too creative and I have to find the pivot. And some of these guys are going to play 40 plus minutes. And there's just so many ways that they get there on a raw points projection with 3 games. So I do think there's something to that. It doesn't mean that you're playing the most vanilla generic lineup in large field tournaments because you have to do something. But I do think there's an element to overthinking playoffs, in particular with the NBA, because some of these guys, and we're going to talk about a lot tonight, Giannis in particular, they're going to be out there. There's no blowout risk. There's no, even with fouls, coaches tend to leave them in with 2. There's little things like that I think raise the floor and make things more efficient across the board.
So let's get into our actual NBA playoffs talk. We do have 3 big games tonight. We got Milwaukee, Miami, Phoenix, and the Lakers, Denver, Portland. We've got 2 hours of coverage after the show, as I mentioned, with a deeper dive and live before lock. So stay tuned on the channel to check those out. We've got to get our takes in first because we are on the first show. So let's talk about each team on the slate, as well as their top DFS plays and bets. And I know that's going to be one that's going to be near and dear to Ben's heart here. But we got Miami, who is down 2-0 as a 1-point home dog versus Milwaukee. And I will say, for how I'm viewing the slate, I do think Jimmy Butler, I know he's kind of disappointed some people recently with the price tag being so appealing and just hasn't had the outlier days. And in the first spot in game 1, got outscored by Kawhi, which kind of makes sense. Kawhi was a little bit cheaper, but today Jimmy's at a price tag where I don't really know there's a great direct pivot. I do think with Miami being down 2-0, I don't see how Butler doesn't play in excess of 40 minutes today. We haven't projected for 38.2. The Osmo minutes projections. Butler to me is the guy, Ben, that I think you have to build around. Bam Adebayo in the mix. And I do think taking Miami to win, it's only a 1-point spread here for them as a 1-point dog at home. But I think Miami, I believe in the Heat. I am more of a believer in Heat culture than some people out there. I don't love the Tyler Hero stuff and how he's been basically laid to waste for the year. But I do think with them, they have to win this game, don't they?
Well, I mean, they have to win this game if the Heat
have
any.
Do you think they're going to? Because
no, I
think
don't.
They have enough to pull it off, and you do not. Okay, so let's go.
I don't. I'm on, and we talked about this last week, and so far I'm not going to be celebrating just yet. Maybe tomorrow you'll see me drinking champagne when the Bucks win tonight. But I'm on the Bucks heavily in the series. They were very fortunate in a lot of ways to win game 1. They had one of those games in game 2. You can't really take much from that. Bryn Forbes was he hit 15 threes. So tonight you're going to get Miami's best punch. And I do think from the DFS side, Bam and Jimmy Butler, you just mentioned it, they're going to be on the floor as much as humanly possible. They have to produce. I do think on the other side, there's some problems. Giannis is figuring it out. He hasn't shot well, but he's still finding a way to really decimate them inside. He's got, 31 boards in 2 games. That's going to be a problem for them. But I do think Jimmy Butler, 8,400 price tag. I think he pushes for 40 minutes tonight. Going to be extremely popular, but I think that's warranted. I will say though, ultimately, Spags, I'm going to go up 3-0 here. I think I'm going to ride with the Bucks here. I think they finally stomp down and avoid the series going really deep.
So for the Bucks, in terms of plays on that side, you mentioned Giannis. I do think Dante DiVincenzo going to be a good play today on both DraftKings and Fanduel, as well as No House Advantage, who we'll talk about in a little bit on that segment coming up. But I do think Giannis, a guy that if you can afford to get there, I don't know the value you'll be taking to get there and have the most confidence in. If you could fit Giannis in, I do think he's a play that we do know the floor has been there, the ceiling has been there as well. The minutes will continue to be there, though I guess the one pathway for him to get less run today would be Miami somehow shoots the lights out tonight at home, and then you see decreased run for Giannis in the fourth quarter. That could be one way that could trip him up. But he's not terribly highly owned. I think to me, it feels like Westbrook yesterday, who I know did not pay off. But if you can get to the field's expected 30% ownership of Giannis, I wouldn't have an issue with it. And I know you talked about Milwaukee for the betting side. So tell me about the DFS plays here. Are you going to get to Giannis, or can you get to Giannis? Or would you be more inclined to try to take the discount and go to some of the other Bucks?
Yeah, so I think you can do it in a situation like this. You mentioned the ownership on a 3-game slate. It's not overwhelming. for him. And I get why that's happening. There's just a big opportunity cost. And, there are certainly Jokic and others that you can build a little more balance. But I feel pretty confident. Yes, there's always some risk of a blowout, but I really think this is going to be a competitive game as the spread indicates. And I don't know, I just look at Giannis's his games, game 2, you can't really read much. He only played 31 minutes because they won by 34 points. Game 1 went into overtime, but he was really not good. He only shot 37% from the field. It took 27 shots. He's 1 of 10 in the series from 3. I know that's not a huge part of his game, but you know what? Anything I get from that, to me, I'm treating it as a bonus. He's a walking double-double right now. He's going to pound them inside. If he makes his free throws and he stays out of foul trouble, add in a couple steals, maybe a block, I think Giannis has the highest ceiling on the entire slate. But I want to kind of pass it back. You mentioned Dante. What about Middleton? Because he was the hero in game 1. He's sitting at flat 8. Do you think maybe you could start or take a little, him and Butler in this game? You get 2 guys kind of in that balanced range, and you still have plenty of salary to work around.
I think it's an interesting approach because I would tend to view Middleton because of the price tag as being a little more close to a Butler pivot, where if you thought, Miami was just going to get boat raced again and Butler doesn't quite get there, maybe Middleton has the outlier day and outscores him at a slightly cheaper price tag and similar positionality. So that would be my thought with Middleton more so, but I agree you can sort of stack it up here. Holiday would appeal to me a little bit more in terms of the median projection, but both these guys are at price tags and also ownership. Well, they'll both be under projected 20% ownership on DraftKings today, a little bit over that on Fanduel, but not very much. I do think for those guys, like they are your pivots, to be honest, and 2 guys who could certainly have the outlier day alongside Dante DiVincenzo, who to me, it's worth pointing out, I don't think Bryn Forbes shoots the lights out from 3 again. The guy who we really carved minutes away from in that process was Dante DiVincenzo. So Dante, to me, getting a few more minutes today, being a quality guy who adds rebounds, assists, steals, all of that, and scores a little bit. Dante, I think, going to be a very appealing semi-value play on today's slate. Let's keep it moving here because we are short on time. We got Phoenix getting the 101.8 implied points going against the Lakers, a 7-point spread for the Lakers at home. And Ben, last time the Lakers took care of business. So are you willing to trust Phoenix today with Chris Paul's injury status? Really a huge thing for them. Cam Payne should probably not be playing that many minutes, no matter how good he was. It does seem like Chris Paul wilting and getting injured again for what should be like a championship caliber playoff run. It's kind of a sad outcome for him to see.
Every time. I mean, it happened with Houston, and it's I feel bad for him. It's just a tough spot, and it really, in a lot of ways, hobbles their chances. So, looking at them from the DFS side, I'll be honest, I thought that DeAndre Ayton might struggle, and he's been anything but. He's been fantastic in these couple games, and if he's pushing 40 minutes on the court, we have him projected for just over 38 tonight. It's hard not to like him at a $6,300 price tag. He's just been a man inside against Drummond, against AD, and as long as he stays out of foul trouble, it's hard not to see him contributing again. Then obviously we know that if the Suns have any chance, they're 6.5-point dogs tonight. Devin Booker's got to be huge. I don't have a strong take on the play. I think if you get to him, I feel fine about that. I prefer Jimmy Butler for just a couple $100 more. But I think really, they have to become the 1-2 punch now, because to me, CP3 is kind of out of the picture.
Yeah, shoulder injury for a guy like CP3, who is sort of involved in every play, going to be tough to dig out. But I'm with you on Ayton. I think the price tag on him still not high enough. The ownership, shockingly, not as high as I would think for Ayton, though that's certainly something that can move around as we get closer to lock. But Booker and Ayton, I think 2 interesting tournament plays today. And Ayton has just been a great play every game. And I'm kind of baffled that his value price tag and also, value relative to him price tag and 38-minute projection, that he's only projected for 20% ownership on DK, only 10% on FanDuel too. So keep an eye on those numbers. We'll talk about him as we get through the day. The Lakers, the big performer last game was going to be Anthony Davis, who rebounded from a really disastrous first game for him. But overall, LeBron, Anthony Davis certainly going to be strongly in play. Dennis Schroeder also had a decent effort. Drummond, I think, had probably one of his better games he'll have in the playoffs. The Lakers side, though, Ben, I feel like sort of tough to get to from a DFS perspective. Certainly, I think you can talk yourself into taking the bet a little bit more for them. But how are you feeling about the Lakers players? And I guess, would you take the Lakers with this spread?
Probably a pass for me, honestly. I think if I had to bet the game, I would probably lean to the Lakers, but I don't really love the situation. And you mentioned, LeBron and AD are going to do their thing, but I think, to me, Giannis, even though he's a little more expensive, possesses more of a range of outcomes in terms of ceiling. Schroeder, listen, he's been playing good, and I think he can kind of be that third wheel to them. Price is pretty reasonable, sub 6K. The one guy I don't feel like chasing is Drummond. I kind of agree with what you said. I think that might be an outlier when we zoom out of how good he was inside in that last game. And then everyone else in the Lakers, the KCPs of the world and the Caruso, they're kind of just, contributors, role players. I don't see a ton of ceiling there. So unless you're in a jam for salary, To me, there's not a ton to love, even on a short slate with the Lakers tonight.
Next game, we have Denver facing Portland, a game where Portland is favored by 4 points at home after they had a really gross blowout in game 2, which I did call on the show. So I'm pretty happy with that result overall. Denver, yeah, that's any victories we can get on the show. You got to take them where you can. Denver, though, in this spot does seem like they, maybe learned some lessons. To Portland, definitely going to volley it back. And I do think the series, one a lot of experts had going to 7 games or at least 6 games. And I think that does seem the way it's trending. But you do have Jokic and Porter Jr. I'd put those guys out today. Monty Morris continues to be a value play. Porter Jr., I would also say the field's going to be there a lot, but he also did, not need to shoot a lot last game because that game was so mostly control. You're not going to see a lot of days with Jamal Murray out that Michael Porter Jr. only puts up 13 shots. And I think that does reflect the situation here. But Jokic and Porter definitely look good to me. I think Monty Morris and Michael Green still in the mix for value plays here, Ben. But on Denver side, or I guess Portland side, do you have more of interest in the Nuggets players for DFS? Do you have more interest in the betting? Do you have more interest in the Portland players? Just tell me what you think is the most appealing aspect of this game.
So this is the best game. I think if you're going to stack one up, it's probably this one. Blazers sitting 3.5, 4-point favorites at home. I do think they get this game. I don't love laying a money line, but you're getting like minus 160-ish. Those points can hurt. You're up 4 points, meaningless basket, and you don't cover, but they win the game. I think Portland holds tonight. Looking at the DFS side, certainly Nurkic, when he stays out of foul trouble, I know that's a theme I keep saying, guys, he's going to get the rebounds. He'll contribute with the points, but he's got to be on the court. Last game, he was not on the court for that reason. He did foul out. So they really do need him to push the minutes up. And I think he can do that. So you've got him, Porter Jr. and Jokic, you've already mentioned. I'm totally in line with that. The guys I want to ask you real quick before we move on is, it's always Dame time. Obviously, he can explode. But what do you make of McCollum? He's another balanced option, 7,300. Certainly playing at home. He's been very efficient. He took 12 shots in that second game, but he was 9 for 12. Do you think the volume can kind of go to that game 1 where he took 20 shots?
I think he's certainly a tournament play to me. The thing with this series really has been that the ownership has been there pretty much every game for Lillard and McCollum in a way where they don't stand out meaningfully as tournament options to me. And on FanDuel, McCollum's price tag, I think, makes him a little bit more unavoidable. But on Draftkings, still project for 24% ownership. It's me as a value median projection. He does project lower than Lillard, does project lower than Nurkic, does also project as a value play lower than Powell and Covington for me, who I know is going to be the bane of a lot of people's existence once again today. But I agree, like McCollum to me is a tournament play from the team, and Covington maybe to some extent too, where if people are really burned by him being terrible the last few games, he still is going to look better in terms of a median projection. And I think you have to kind of get close to the field on Covington today because of the price tag that he has. But yeah, I think to me, trying to get some of the less round options in a game where you have such a high total as well, and the other games are going to be a little slower paced. I agree with you. I think going to McCollum has a lot of sense. And on FanDuel, though, just know you won't be alone at all if you are going that direction. Let's keep going through to we had a lot of shit to hit on here. So let's get one more add in.
Aggressive now that I look back in hindsight, but we're going to get through it.
We are pros here. We got about 10 minutes left, and we are going to yield the floor to the deeper dive. But first of all, let's get the plug in for the Osmo Plus tools and content for nearly every DFS sport. Get it for yourself at osmo.com/join. Use an Osmo weekly pass for $29.95. That's going to include full access to all the player projections, ownership projections, premium Slack channel, lineup builder. It's there for all the sports. And for each sport, we also have individual tools like the top stacks tool, top pitcher tool for baseball, top golfers tool that Ben is no stranger to in the PGA streets. We also have the ones for MMA, top fighters tool. Again, boom bust tool for NBA. There's just so many things at your fingertips if you get that weekly pass. So go check it out at osmo.com/join. And the NBA weekly packages as well are still going strong, $16.95 a week or $4.95 for an express package that gives you all the showdown content as well. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Osmo Plus today. Time to hit the MLB diamond for biggest bat. And it's going to be an interesting slate for bats here, where we do have a lot of guys projected in the same range today. Show Ohtani, number 1 on the board, plus 300 to hit a home run. Jose Abreu, plus 300 to hit a home run as well. Joey Gallo, plus 320 to hit a home run. Adolis Garcia, plus 325 to hit a home run. And Justin Williams somehow sneaking into this list at plus 325 to hit a home run. So Ben, do you want to take my corollary here of the random player who sticks out, wondering how they got there, and go Justin Williams' way or somebody else for the biggest bat?
So I can't do that because I actually don't even know much about that. I'm going to go with Jose Abreu. My formula with this, again, Spags, I certainly defer to you on the baseball side, but the White Sox are a heavy favorite at home today, minus 240. Runs are expected there. Even they are favored to win by more than a run and a half in terms of the run line. So certainly he should be a focal point of that offense. He should have opportunities. I'll keep it very simple.
So the one cause for concern I would have with the Braves is that the climate in Chicago going to be much colder today for some reason, down 60 degrees. I guess there could be some humidity. Also, I think this is a game that could have some weather concerns. So make sure to watch out the postponement risk on the Osmo projection. So, but you took the guy anyway, so I'll let you absorb all of that risk for yourself. And I think for me, I'm going to go to Adolis Garcia, who's a guy that I've talked about a lot. And I think started to sell some of the guys I've done the deeper dive and strategy shows with on just what he's doing on the year, because he's a younger player, doesn't have any name brand in Texas for the most part, a team that people want to ignore. But Joey Gallo's, like, obviously we know he's always got the power there. Certainly a guy who can hit the ball well over a longer period of time. But Garcia, 337 ISO against right-hand pitching. Chris Flexen, it does keep the ball down fairly well, but on the year giving up a 327 batting average. Also has a 13.5% K rate, so you won't see some of the downsides of a young hitter in Adolis Garcia. So in this spot, I don't love the Seattle park quite as much either, but I do think Adolis Garcia's power translates everywhere. So for me, he is the biggest bat, and I hope he comes through. And also be wary of playing him today in DFS, because that is one spot where he's going to be very highly owned. On the prop bet market, you don't have to worry about that quite as much. Biggest arm, we got Dylan Cease, over under 6.5 strikeouts. Steven Strasburg, over under 5.5 strikeouts. Sonny Gray, over under 4.5. Chris Bassett, over under 5.5. And Carlos Martinez with the very impotent prop of 3.5 strikeouts. Ben, out of these ones, do you have any lean?
I'm going to go to the A's pitcher in Bassett at home, minus 150. I know the Angels are, they don't strike out at a high clip, but I do think here in a situation, I'm going to go there. Over under is just 7.5 in this game. I kind of like the A's if I was forced to make a pick there. So I think he can have an effective game.
So I think for me, it'll be Sonny Gray. And I think there may be could be some concerns, I guess, with him going deep enough into the game on the year, pitching just 5 innings per start, but has at a 29% K rate. And in my heart, I do kind of want to go to Strasburg because he's been so bad this year. And we talk about a lot on the MLB shows when a guy's so bad, but historically has been really good. They're normally due for some positive regression that's going to come at some point. But even, on this day where it's going to be 80 degrees in Washington, I do think Strasburg comes with some risk because he's getting hit pretty hard on the year. 5.2 xFIP allowed, a really nice launch angle, 10% barrel ball rate. Sonny Gray, not quite as, not quite that level, not quite as bad in terms of all those numbers, but also it's a 29% K rate for himself. So tough matchup against Washington, but I'm going to trust the arm talent here and go to Sonny Gray. And now is the time that we all care about the most. Not unfortunately Puppet Lindquist returning to the show, but it is in fact the Dr. Ben Rasa prop bet of the day. It is time for you. And Ben, I have bad news that the last time you were on the show, you did fall to 19-7 because Jaren Jackson put up 14 points the day you wanted the over on 14.5. So Ben, you haven't gotten to 20 wins yet, but you're so close. It's like being a starting pitcher, and we're just waiting to see you get over the hump. So is this the day for your 20th win?
This is the day. Yeah, Jaren Jackson, not his fault. It was certainly me. I misprojected those minutes. He did not come back late in that game, and Memphis knew what they were doing. They're still in the playoffs. Warriors aren't. But you know what? We're going to get it done today. We're going to the game, Spags. We talked right at the top. I'm sticking with the theme. I think the Bucks can, and I think they will win this game. If they do, it's hard to think that Giannis can't push over his points prop. It's 28.5 tonight. And as I mentioned, he hasn't even shot well at all. He was 1 for 10 from 3 in this series. He's been mediocre at the line. He's just been pounding them on the boards and inside. A lot of dunks, a lot of layups. I think we see that again tonight. And if the game stays close, and it's hard to imagine Miami getting blown out, I think that Giannis will push for 40 plus minutes here. He'll have the volume. So 28.5, and you look minus 103. So I'm basically paying no vig. It's a good opportunity for him. I think even if Milwaukee loses the game, barring that they're blown out, he can push over this even a losing effort. So I'm going to go to Giannis tonight for a big output.
Yeah, I've got him projected for 30.6 real life points today. Certainly a good fantasy point play. And yeah, the median projection being over. I'll always trust Ben anyway with these for the most part, because Ben's record, I think, speaks for itself. But also, Ben, one of the sharpest guys out there. If you're not checking out Ben's content for the PGA and also the other horse racing, really, you do a little bit of everything, Ben. So to your credit.
A lot of different types of bets. That's what we're here for. We like to mix it up on this show.
So I've got a way to make up time, and I hope this will also please our sponsor. But Ben, I imagine you won't mind sitting out the no house advantage prop or not, as I will too.
Fire.
I think we can yield the floor to a new guest we've had on the tip-off recently. I saw the clamoring earlier in the chat, and I think it's time to have our new pal, Puppet Lindquist, come on the show once more to give his no house advantage takes on the day, because it is a chalky day on no house advantage, and there's nobody who knows the chalk better than old Puppet Lindquist. Is that not right, my friend? Yes, it is correct. And there's the thing with no house advantage. You got to get the best props. Lines on there. Chalk doesn't even matter. And that's the main thing with no house advantage. Play who you want. It's peer-to-peer prop betting. And there's a lot of great props on the board, including Dante DiVincenzo. The over-under for him, 15.5 points plus rebounds plus assists. And that looks like an easy over for him. Great play today. Minutes should be secure. No all low-owned Bryn Forbes to get in the way today. It's all going to be Dante DiVincenzo. Glock him in. 10-point play at no house advantage. DeAndre Ayton over 10.5 rebounds. One of the best players on the board, according to Osmo as well. Another sure thing who should see a lot of minutes, unless he gets the foul trouble. But that should be good besides that. So go play DeAndre Ayton and Kyle Kuzma over under 19.5 points plus rebounds plus assists. That's the bad one. Go play the under for Kyle Kuzma. He's a very strong play as the under. Nobody wants to play Kyle Kuzma, but you can play him on no house advantage by fading him because he is trash. Don't forget to play on No House Advantage. Our sponsor is offering a different spin on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across the NBA, MLB, NFL, and PGA for cash prizes. This exclusively peer-to-peer fantasy sports platform levels the playing field and makes it easier for you to win real cash compared to your traditional DFS sites. And the best part is you can join for free today. Download the No House Advantage app today and use the promo code Awesemo to receive a deposit bonus up to $20 for new signups. Beat your friends, not the house. Win big with player props today. All right, there we go. That's
You got a Brett? That was you went for the whole enchilada, Spags. I missed this.
I wasn't talking, Ben. I don't know if you saw there was a puppet.
No, I blacked out. I lost it there.
That was our pal puppet link was coming in. Of course, shout out to our boy Eric for always being a good guy. Ben, give me your good dog and bad dog at once so we can get out of the way and let real content come up next with the NBA Deeper Dive and Live Before Lock.
Yeah, make sure to tune that out. And of course, Spags, as you mentioned, you'll be back soon enough breaking down all the latest news. For me, it's pretty simple. I think the Bucks get it done tonight. And unfortunately for the Nuggets, I think they're going to go down 2-1 in this spot. It's not, the series won't be over, but I don't see backing them on the road, and I'm going to back the Bucks on the road. So those are my two favorite of the night.
I have no disagreement with those picks. I would say I'm a little intrigued by Phoenix as a good dog. I do think the Lakers can take a team lightly, and I wouldn't mind trying to take a stab at the money line if you just got some money to burn in your pocket and willing to hope Chris Paul is finally injecting his shoulder with whatever he needs. Any fade of the day or make or break for you that you really want to get going and before we yield the floor to the Deeper Dive and Live Before Lock?
No, I think that Giannis, he's going to control my prop, and I think the Bucks have no chance to win that game if he doesn't play really well. So I'm riding with the Greek Freak tonight. I think we're going to get it done. We're going to go up 3-0, and I'll be in a much better mood tomorrow when we do.
And my make or break, I think I'll throw out Michael Porter Jr. He's a guy to me projects really well. I do think the field will be either heavy, so I will be in that make or break position with a lot of you guys taking the chalk, like our pal Puppet Lindquist over here to my side now, laying so casually and his dead lifeless eyes are really what throw you for a loop. Make sure to follow at JazzRazDFS, follow at Chris Spags, follow at Osmo_com, and stay tuned on this very link. The Deeper Dive coming up next, and then Live Before Lock as well. You'll have me and Greg coming back one more time. Maybe no puppets, maybe some puppets. Hard to say. We appreciate you guys. Tune in tomorrow. Aton will be here doing the 3-man weave with me and Ben. So come join us then. We appreciate you guys. Have a great day. Good luck.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA Deeper Dive presented by Prize Picks. I'm Dave Loughran at Laffy_D on the Twitters, LOUGHY_D. Hit me with that follow if you're not doing so yet. And while you're there, follow Adam Scherer at ShipMyMoney DFS, currently living inside of 120-degree sauna. If he passes out throughout the show, just know he'll probably wake back up at some point. What's going on, man?
Not much. It does feel like I'm in a sauna. It's not particularly pleasurable.
You know, there was a time where you did a deeper dive naked.
Yeah, that one was in my mom's like freezing cold basement. Now I wish I need to lose a bet so I can just start doing them naked again.
Yeah, that was, by the way, that was not something he just decided to do one day. That was a lost bet. I've always wondered, did you go full bet paid off, or were you wearing some trousers?
No, man, I had basketball shorts on.
Okay, I thought so. I'm gonna have to pull that one day. Was that with FanVice?
Yeah, I think so.
It was. Yeah. That was a long time ago, but a good one. I've gone back and tried to find those videos. I just think they're gone.
I hope so.
Yeah.
There's one in particular I really hope is gone.
Yes, I wasn't on that, unfortunately. So if it's what you're referring to.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Shaving day.
Yep.
Anyway, happy to have you guys with us. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet. If you're carrying over from the tip-off show, welcome. If you're just jumping in now, welcome to you as well. First thing to do, just, give us some confidence getting started off here by hitting that thumbs up. Show us some love. And, if you appreciate free DFS content, this is the place to come every day of the week for every sport. Subscribe to the channel too. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe. You don't have to deal with us again, but I think you'll want to stick around, whether it's football, basketball, MMA, MLB, PGA, NASCAR, whatever. We got you covered right here on the Awesemo YouTube channel. And if you want to join, hit that join below. Become a member on the YouTubes. It's a fun thing to do. Great community here, and we're making things happen. So, Adam, the first question before we dive into the 3 games that we've got on today's docket, how are you approaching this slate? Is there value that we can turn to? And how does it differ from some of the slates we've seen earlier in the week?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a ton of value in terms of like 3K guys or $3,400 guys. Even to the level of like Taj Gibson yesterday. I don't see much of that, but there are certainly guys to pay up for. There's also a mid-range that offers a lot of value. One kind of overarching thing that I don't think we explicitly touched on yesterday, but, kind of in a roundabout way we did, but it highlighted itself again on last night's slate because a lot of mid-range guys play several more minutes per game in the postseason. I don't think stars and scrubs builds are quite as necessary as they end up being during the regular season, because not only do you get sort of weaker value in the postseason because there's just, teams aren't injured. They're not playing scrubs for 30 minutes. But you also, you have a smaller gap between the mid-range and the upper range in terms of minutes played. You have teams game planning for those expensive guys like Westbrook and Embiid that can, slow them down a little bit. So I do think it's something where, strategy can change a little bit, where, you don't necessarily have to be forcing in like the Emmanuel Quickleys of the world just to make sure that you get whatever stud is on the slate.
I was actually off today. I don't do Thursday strategy shows, Andy. Thanks for asking those. As a matter of fact, I'm making some best ball and fantasy football videos that I've had a ton of fun doing. An absolute blast making these videos. Check them out over at right here on the YouTube channel if you haven't done so yet. Appreciate you saying that, Nate. Yeah, if you're in the NFL, check them out. They're short videos, 5, 6, 7-minute videos, giving you top 5, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, all of that stuff, rookies, value, sleepers, you name it, busts. We're going to be doing a ton of that. So it's a lot of fun. If you have any suggestions for what we should do with fantasy football, I know it's still a little ways away, but you've got massive best ball contests already drafting, $1 million up top, and a lot of other stuff going on. So Adam, best ball is going to be huge this year. Once again, I'm stoked for it. I know you max entered the Draftkings one last year.
Yeah, I did. I did really well with best ball last year. I still don't know that I'll get into it this year, but I always say that this time of year. And then once it starts to get closer to the season, I just dive in.
All right. Yeah, me too. So I bet putting the research in heavy recently, and it's my favorite time of the year. It's like Christmas for adults when football starts, and it lasts a lot longer than that as well. Even you got into football the past, dude, you did football content this year, which was fantastic.
Yeah, I always get into football DFS. This was the first year I got into content.
I thought you did pretty well with it, man. You were down on yourself thinking, I don't know, but I was pretty impressed with it. So we'll run it back again this year. Stick with us. But now we're still talking basketball. We got a long way to go through the first round and all the way up until the finals. I will ask you one thing. How do you feel about Westbrook getting popcorn dumped on his head?
I mean, it's stupid. And like, obviously it's stupid, but the part to me that like blows my mind is all the people that defend it. Like,
totally agree. The guy was a jerk off.
Right. Like, people are like, it's just popcorn. Why is he overreacting? Like, are you telling me I can walk around Philly and just start dumping popcorn on people's heads and they're just going to like not fight me?
You'd get killed. Yeah.
Right. Like,
the funny thing to me, don't worry, we'll get into these games. We got plenty of time. Hopefully all of you are as interested in this as we are. The funny thing about that is it's not just that. I was having a conversation with my buddies from my hockey team about it this morning. Bro, they were getting smoked. They're about to go down 2-0 in the series. He just got hurt. And then someone dumped popcorn on his head. Like, right. You're going to be pissed off. You're going to be pissed off. And people are like, he didn't look that hurt. Like, he just, like, someone dumped the food on the man's head. Right. I'm not saying he was, but what I'm saying is, like, apparently he wasn't in perfect shape. Listen. The thing that bothered me is LeBron calling to dox this guy. Like, bro, what do you mean protect our players? An asshole dumped popcorn on his head. His season tickets were revoked, and he'll never be at Wells Fargo Center again. All right. Yeah, the Sixers handled it correctly. You don't need to dox the guy. I mean, you're essentially when you're trying. I don't know. That stuff bothers the hell out of me. But I'm with Westbrook 100%. I'd have been pissed off too. Yeah, with the LeBron thing, like I get what he was saying, but the difference there is like, yeah, when you're a pro athlete, everything you do is under the microscope because you're a pro athlete. Like, the appropriate response was what the Sixers did. Did you see the Knicks thing though? The guy spitting at Trae Young? Yeah. Listen, you spit on someone, and if you disappear, it's like, well, what I want to know, spit on someone. I don't think his spit hit Trae Young. It hit the chick with 50. How is that guy still alive? That's what I'm saying. Like, if he disappeared, you kind of go, well, yeah, not surprised. That's a whole different story. Like, both of them assholes. Spitting on someone compared to putting popcorn on someone, just massive difference. Not 100%. That doesn't, but like, it's still, the people on Twitter like, well, he didn't spit on him. He just threw popcorn. Chill out. It's like, no, like, yeah, spitting would have been worse. Right. Exactly. But it's still dumping food on a dude's head. Would you rather be punched or spit on? Depends by an average-sized person without fighting capability, like without training as any type of martial arts or boxing. Punched. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, yeah, I'll say, like, would I rather be spit on or knocked out? I'll take being spit on, but yeah. I'm not asking if you'd rather be spit on by, or if you'd rather be punched by Aaron Donald, right? But, you get spit on, and that pride goes down quite quickly. And if I get spit on, I'm probably going to end up getting punched anyway. So yeah, that's a good point. All right. You ready to talk some basketball, actual basketball DFS? Yeah. Because I could keep going with this, but I think it's probably time. This isn't the daily sports show, nor is it the strategy show. So we'll stop boring you guys with the minutia. What's that? I said, nor is it the tip-off show. Nor is it the tip-off show. It's the deeper dive. We're here to talk basketball, but I thought that needed to be brought up. When your Wizards are swept, though, Westbrook will forget all about it, and you won't have to worry about it anymore. Yeah, well, I just hope ticket prices keep going down before Saturday. Yeah, I'd love to be there with you. Milwaukee, Miami, Milwaukee Bucks coming into Miami after just an absolute blowout victory over the Heat. I really thought after game one that we'd see a pretty good series. And, maybe Miami comes back down at South Beach and brings this to a 2-1 series. But that last game, man, listen, when Milwaukee shoots like that from three, there's just no slowing them down. Like that's the only way they beat Brooklyn once they face them is if they can knock down 60% of threes in the first half like they did. They're 1.5-point favorites though, Adam. Only laying 1.5 on the road today with a 225 total. So Vegas has this as a very, very competitive game. Yeah, and I think that from a DFS standpoint, there's a lot of stuff to see here as well. Some pretty favorable pricing in different spots. I think this is kind of, hopefully it goes better than the Wizards-Sixers game did from a DFS standpoint. But this one, from a pricing standpoint, just kind of looks to me like that game did, where you're just going to end up getting a bunch of pieces. All right, let's start it off with Giannis Take it away.
Yeah, so I think Giannis is a very good play. I think, the matchup's rough. Miami certainly is a good defensive team. They're slow and all that, but Giannis's price is still around where you see it during the regular season. And you're seeing him in the competitive game in this series. He played about 40 minutes in regulation. That's a big deal because if you remember last season, Budenholzer basically decided that he would rather rest Giannis than win a playoff series. They're not doing that.
That was your best line from the deep dive today. When I read that, I actually laughed out loud. I thought that was so good.
Yeah, I mean, it's what it was. He did what Nate McMillan's doing with the Hawks now. But, that was a point of contention in the offseason. Giannis said he wanted to play more during the regular season, and now he's playing more in the postseason. So even though you expect his per-minute production to drop a bit because of the matchup, in 5 games, including the postseason with Miami, he's averaged 1.5 fantasy points per minute. For the season, he's at 1.7. That's still a lot of production if you're going to get 38 to 40 minutes out of Giannis. The issue that you're going to run into, though, is that, like we were talking about at the beginning of the show, there isn't really 3K value on the slate. There's not even really 4K value outside of a couple guys that you can kind of gamble on. And there is a lot of guys in that like 7K to 8K range that look pretty good. So I certainly wouldn't call Giannis a necessity, but I do think he's underpriced if you ignore what the rest of your lineup looks like, at least. So I think Giannis, no issues with him if you're able to get him into a lineup that you like.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And man, the biggest thing with Giannis, you and I have been preaching this already, is just the fact that those minutes, he played 31 minutes in a game that they won by almost 40 points, right? So that's whatever. 45 minutes in that overtime game, you're getting 40 plus in regulation from him. Am I saying you to get that for sure today? No, but if this game does stay close, and it should, like it's projected to stay close, and that's all we can go off of, you're getting 38 to 40 minutes. I'm assuming you haven't projected for 38.
Yeah, 38.
Yeah, but he could play an easy 40, 41 minutes here. Mike Budenholzer hopefully learning from his mistakes. When you have the best per minute producer in the world playing 40 minutes in any matchup, it really doesn't matter. Look, it's a tough spot, but he dropped 65 in 31 minutes last game. There's nothing to hold Giannis back here if the minutes are going to be there. What about Middleton and Holiday, though? I know Holiday's a guy that you touched on at length today in the deep dive, totally free at Awesemo.com every single day of the week. You don't have to pay for it. You don't even have to be a subscriber. Does he look like a decent option to you at a mid price point at point guard or shooting guard if you're on DraftKings?
Yeah, I think a better option on DraftKings than Fanduel because of the price difference. But Holiday 7,600 on DraftKings. I mean, this is someone that averaged about 1.12 DraftKings points per minute this year. And he's another one where, he averaged 32.5 minutes per game in the regular season. You have to remember that Milwaukee was involved in so many blowouts during the regular season that all these guys averaged a few minutes less than they most likely will in the postseason. So when you see them at prices that reflect what they did during the regular season, they're naturally going to be underpriced. And I think that's the case for Holiday here. If he plays 38, 39 minutes in a competitive game at 7,600, even if you account for the difficult matchup and assume he's going to produce at a little bit lower than average rate, he's still just going to grade out as a really good value. On FanDuel, it's a little bit tougher. I wouldn't say he's overpriced, but he's not a glaring value like he is on DraftKings.
Any interest in Chris Middleton, who was the game one hero after, really, really having people sour on him last postseason in the bubble against this very same Miami team, even though, to be fair, he did have a couple really solid games after Giannis got hurt.
Yeah, I think that Middleton is kind of the opposite of Holiday for me. He looks perfectly fine on DraftKings at 8K, but where I think he really stands out is that $7,700 small forward spot on FanDuel, because, like, for example, when you look at DraftKings, you have Holiday. You have Holiday, who's less expensive than Middleton. You have Jimmy Butler, who's only like $400 more expensive on the other side of this game. When you look on FanDuel, Butler is $1,400 more expensive than Middleton at small forward, and it kind of just leaves him as an option that stands out in that price range. So difficult matchup for Middleton, but we know he's a good player. He's going to play big minutes. I think the pricing and the position on FanDuel in particular really stand out.
So obviously, last game, Bryn Forbes was the hero off the bench. The guy had 14 points in 6.5 minutes in the first quarter. Just remarkable. Scored more points than he had minutes on the game, was 6 of 9 for 3. He's still essentially minimum salary everywhere. And to be fair, right, each of his last 3 games played have come against Miami. 2 of them he's played 20 minutes, and he scored 20 plus real points in 2 of the 3. So does that mean anything? Absolutely not. But at the same time, is there enough value on this slate or enough ways to build good lineups without saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I will look to Bryn Forbes, or is this just an exercise in futility looking to get to someone like that when people might actually chase it after the last game he had?
I think it's an exercise in futility. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the show too. Like, it would be different if you had Giannis at 11K, because if you play Forbes, it's basically to get Jokic in or to get Giannis in, you know, or two of those guys or whatever. But it's just different because Forbes is most likely going to score so few points. Like, let's say you get a 70-point game from Giannis and you pair him with Bryn Forbes, and Forbes gets like, I don't know, 17, which would still be a pretty good game. So you got like 87 points combined from those two guys. You're still probably only winning like half the time against some pairing like Bam Adebayo and DeAndre Ayton or something like that. That costs, you know, about the same, just, you know, throwing names out there at similar prices. And that's when you get that 70-point game from Giannis. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, I don't think, to go that route.
All right. Anything else for Milwaukee then? If we're looking at the non-big three, we're not going to Forbes. His ownership's still very low today, but I think appropriately so. Guys like Dante DiVincenzo stand out to you. Brook Lopez at a mid 4K price point. Anybody here have any value to us today against the Heat?
I think DiVincenzo actually is going to end up being a useful piece. It's not someone that you're going to single out and like be, you know, the first guy you put in your lineup, but there's several guys on the slate around that 5K price point that we just know they're going to get enough minutes and they're productive enough players that I think they're going to help you fill out some pretty strong lineups. And DiVincenzo is one of them. For the season, he averaged about 0.85 DraftKings points per minute. He averaged about 28 minutes per game. In that first game, he played 32.5 minutes in regulation. So another guy where I think, you know, in the postseason, in competitive games, you're going to see him get a few more minutes. You're not expecting DiVincenzo to single-handedly win you a tournament or, you know, a head-to-head or anything, but it's what you can get around him by just paying that 5K price tag. I think DiVincenzo ends up being pretty useful. You could make a similar argument for Brook Lopez playing around 30 minutes. The reason that I have more of an issue with Lopez than DiVincenzo is the center position today, I think, is really strong. There's four guys that I think you can make a very, very strong case for. So the opportunity cost is pretty high in going to Lopez.
Okay. Anybody else from Milwaukee?
No.
Let's hit on the Miami Heat then. Jimmy Butler stands out here in a huge way, right? Because game one, if you just take a look at the fantasy totals, you say, all right, not bad. If you look at his shooting, it was dismal. He's now 8 for 32 on the series. But at the same time, I don't really care how he gets there, Adam, as long as he gets there. And I don't anticipate them losing by 34 points again today. Butler's cheaper than he's been in a long time, specifically on DraftKings. Does that give us, you know, does that open the door for us to say, all right, we need to just erase our minds from whatever happened last game and his poor shooting in game one, even though he had a huge performance, and get there at 91 on Fanduel, 84 on DraftKings. And I will preface this with, he is right now projected as the highest owned player on DraftKings, second highest owned on Fanduel.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's one of the most mispriced guys on the slate. I mean, you're talking about, assuming this game's competitive, you're talking about someone that is likely to play 40 minutes. He played 40.7 minutes in game one in regulation. So he's likely to be out there for almost the entire game. He averaged 1.3 DraftKings points per minute this season in the games that Bam Adebayo and Goran Dragic were both active. There's, you know, if you're going to take a game or two games and say, oh, Butler's not a good play at a reduced salary in the playoffs, like, you're just not going to win at DFS. I don't think, you know, that's not guaranteeing that Butler does well tonight, but that's just not a thought process that works. So there's really no reason, you know, outside of ownership in a particular lineup, there's no reason to be getting away from Butler here in a pace up spot at a price tag that during the regular season would have been cheap when you were expecting 34 minutes. Now you're expecting 38 to 40. I don't really see how to get away. 41
in game one.
Yeah.
46 including overtime. But yeah, I mean, Butler's going to play a ton of minutes. I understand that the high ownership could be a little bit off-putting, but he's high owned, like you said, because he's pretty much criminally underpriced for a guy that's going to play 41 minutes. And he might, listen, he's not in the Jokic or Giannis or LeBron James tier, but he's in the tier down for a guy that's priced at this point. It just doesn't make sense. Like, he should at least be 92, 93 on DraftKings.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think DraftKings, like, he looks good on FanDuel at 91, but DraftKings is where he really stands out because, like, FanDuel, you can at least make the case where it's like, okay, I'll go LeBron and then I'll save some money and go to Middleton. On DraftKings, Middleton's only $400 less expensive. So it's just he really, really stands out there. And the thing is too, like because pricing is tighter in the postseason, it's just a different dynamic to making your lineups than you get in the regular season, and especially towards the end. Like during the regular season, you would get a lot of situations, a lot of slates where it's like, okay, well, Butler is really underpriced at 8,400, but Giannis is also underpriced at 10,900, and realistically, I can just roster either one. The pricing's tighter tonight, so if you even get a 50 fantasy point game from Butler, you basically need Giannis to be getting 64, 65, which he certainly can, but there's no guarantee he puts that up tonight, and that's 50 certainly isn't the ceiling for Butler.
What do we do with Bam Adebayo, who really Bam and Butler are the two guys that we always start off the Miami Heat with? Bam's been pretty quiet in this series. There's no denying that. But again, there's a long way to go. He's proven throughout the season, with or without Butler on the floor, that he is not elite, but very, very much above average on a per minute basis. And now you've got him coming in at $7,500 on DraftKings. That to me is pretty significant. You did mention that the center position is deep. He's $8,200 on Fanduel. What do we do with Bam at those price points?
Yeah, he's one of the centers that I think is a really good option, and another guy that I think just makes it so, you don't have to go balanced tonight, but it certainly makes it so you can do so, because this is someone that is in a pace-up spot. You're expecting him to play a bunch of minutes, assuming he avoids foul trouble or anything. He played about 36 minutes in regulation in the first game. He's averaged about 1.25 DraftKings points per minute in the games he's played with Butler this year. Pace up spot. He's someone that can do everything on the floor. So it's just a price point, 7,500 on DraftKings, I think is very favorable. On Fanduel at 8,200, I think that's fine as well, even though, of course, the opportunity cost is a little bit higher. But the pricing at center is a little bit tighter as well. So I think Bam is, another very good play. I wouldn't say he's quite as good as Butler, especially when you factor in the position and the other options at the position. But I think Bam is clearly the second best option on Miami.
Goran Dragic really took a huge hit from a minute standpoint because, when you're in his role, blowouts are going to affect you significantly, because if you're someone like Butler, you might get 32 minutes when normally you'd play 38 to 40 in a spot like this. But if you're Goran Dragic, you're dropping down to, 23, 24 minutes in a huge blowout, and it just really kills you. So I think coming off the bench is always somewhat of a concern, but you can't factor that in too much. If if this game's close, Goran Dragic probably gets another, 28 to 30 minutes here. We played 30 minutes last time, played the entire overtime period. He seems also a little bit, I wouldn't say underpriced, but very, very reasonably priced in a spot like this as an integral part of this rotation as the first man off the bench.
Yeah, he's another one in that Dante DiVincenzo price range where I'm not, I don't love Goran Dragic here, but I do think he's a little bit underpriced. And most importantly, he's just going to open stuff up for you in your lineup. This is someone that averages between 0.9 and 1 fantasy points per minute, but he's certainly capable of being the hot hand and going out there and pouring in some points and having a game that pretty greatly exceeds that average production. And in a competitive game, like you said, I expect him to play around 30 minutes. If he's playing well, maybe he plays a little bit more. I think that, 5,100 on DraftKings, 5,900, I believe it is on Fanduel. Again, it's not a glaring value, but it's a piece that's just going to kind of help hold your lineups together, I think.
Anything else for Miami that you want to hit on from top to bottom here? I think we've gotten to most of the big names. I think people will probably ask about Dwayne Dedmon, who was the hero in game 2, but really the circumstances the stars could not have aligned more perfectly for Dedmon in that game. And while he could get another 2 fantasy point per minute type performance, as we've seen him do on occasion, he's probably only getting 12 or 13 minutes again tonight.
Yeah, you're probably not getting Dedmon playing minutes alongside Bam, so that makes it pretty tough to go there. If you did, obviously don't play them together. But there's nothing else that looks good to me on Miami. If I had to point to a couple other guys that you could start to mix in tournaments, Kendrick Nunn at 4,300. I'm only expecting him to play around 24 minutes, but if he's playing well, you certainly could see more minutes for him. And that's a price point that, you don't need that many more minutes for him to exceed. So it's a decent, tournament play to be contrarian. And then Duncan Robinson, I think it's a pretty good matchup for him as far as Milwaukee does like to force guys to shoot threes. That's really all Duncan Robinson does. The problem though is that, at 4,600, you kind of need him to make a lot of threes just to justify that salary, much less beat it. So I wouldn't say those guys are priorities. I think the guys that look the best are Butler, Bam, and Dragic, but you can start to get to those other guys as you start playing a lot of lineups.
Okay. Yeah. I was wondering how many minutes outside of that last game on the season had Bam and Dedmon played alongside each other?
I'm not sure. Dedmon didn't join the team till close to the end.
Yeah. But I'm saying even so, okay. So the answer is 0.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was very much circumstantial. I think you would agree.
Yeah. And I mean, you can see it happen. Like, this is a matchup that, it certainly can. You can have Bam on Giannis, and you can have Dedmon with Lopez. But yeah, I'm not expecting that to be the case.
Yeah, and it didn't exactly work out all that well in game 2.
That's what I was going to say. If they had come back, I'd feel differently.
Right, but it didn't. And Spoelstra's a good coach. Maybe he's experimenting. You want to move on to Phoenix and the Lakers?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Phoenix Suns. Man, the Chris Paul thing here is really strange right now. He played only 23 minutes last time out. They come into LA, 6.5-point dogs, 212 total. Listen, we all knew that the Lakers were covering that last game, and they did by several points. I expect this game to remain very close, though, and the Lakers laying 6.5. I don't think the Suns roll over at all, despite the Lakers being favored in the series pretty heavily. But I want to actually start not with Devin Booker. We'll get to him in a moment, but with Chris Paul, because this is going to send ripple effects throughout this entire roster, right? He played 36 minutes against the Lakers in game 1, had that stinger, hit his head on Cameron Johnson, and then said he heard something snap in the press conference after the game, which was odd. Then he played 23 minutes in a 7-point loss in a postseason game and clearly did not look like himself. Where is your lean towards Chris Paul in one form or fashion today? Because he is, we already know, active, and he went through shoot around.
I think it's a really, really difficult situation. And it's one that, you don't run into it that much. And when you do, there's not a whole lot you can do to be confident, because it's just going to depend on how he's playing and how he feels, right? Like, if he can play through it, they're going to let him. They said, last game that basically it was painful to Monte Williams to watch him run because his arm was hurt so bad. So they took him out. But in situations like that, I do pay a little bit more attention to ownership, because I appreciate that I really have no freaking idea how many minutes Chris Paul is going to play tonight. And so it kind of just becomes more about paying attention to risk reward for him individually. Right now, you have a $7,400 Chris Paul projected for 10% ownership on DraftKings. If we knew Chris Paul was healthy at 7,400, he'd be one of the highest owned guys on the slate, because he'd probably play around 36 minutes and he's well over a fantasy point per minute guy. So at 10% in tournaments, I think I'm pretty interested in Chris Paul, and just, hope that he feels better today and plays relatively well. He's projected for about 30% ownership on Fanduel. The thing on Fanduel, though, is that you don't have Drew Holiday at that same price point, and you have more rigid roster construction. So, higher ownership going to him on Fanduel, but also a relatively better play on Fanduel in terms of just being useful. So I'm interested in him in tournaments. I think as long as the ownership stays down, especially on DraftKings, I would go a different route in cash games. There's no real reason to take on that risk in a format where there's, a lot of uncertainty, and it's not top heavy. You're not benefiting from taking on the risk. But in tournaments, if Chris Paul continues to be projected this low ownership wise, I think that's a spot that is pretty appealing. It could certainly go poorly, but if you get just a relatively healthy Chris Paul game, that can put you in a pretty good situation.
What would you be comfortable getting with Chris Paul if he's only 10%? You don't need to go crazy.
No, I mean, it's not something that I normally manually adjust too much, but if I started getting more than, 3x the field or something like that, I'd probably start to at least make sure that I wasn't just completely taking someone else that I wanted out of my lineups or something.
Okay, fair enough. What are we doing with Devin Booker? I mean, he had a Seth Curry type game the other day, right? Where he scored 31 points. I'm not saying Seth Curry is nearly as a prolific scorer, but only 34 fantasy points. It was one of those games where the peripherals were non-existent. And I actually found that surprising, right? If I told you that Chris Paul would be off the court for, half of the minutes or more that Devin Booker was on the floor, you would actually anticipate Devin Booker's assists specifically and playmaking responsibilities going up, but they didn't. As a matter of fact, Cameron Payne had 7 assists, and I could go down the list, but just kind of a strange game from Devin Booker, don't you think?
Yeah, it was. And I think that, certainly Cameron Payne's a capable backup, and it's different. Cameron Payne being active and being on the floor when Paul is off is different than, we've seen in the past where Devin Booker becomes the point guard. But I do still think that if you were to run a game like that a bunch of times, you do see Booker benefit. For the season, he averaged He averaged 1.25 fantasy points per minute without Chris Paul on the floor. He averaged 1.08 DraftKings points per minute with Paul. So I am very interested in Booker here because you're not paying any sort of, non-Chris Paul premium. He's pretty cheap. He's 8,100 on DraftKings, I think 8,300 on Fanduel. So assuming you're going to get around 40 minutes from Devin Booker, you could tell me Chris Paul plays every minute, and I'm still going to think that Booker's a pretty good play, but he just has more upside baked in than normal because if Paul were fully healthy, you'd assume because they stagger minutes that Booker would play around 12 minutes without Paul on the floor. For every additional minute Chris Paul's not on the floor, Devin Booker's projection goes up at least somewhat. And so you kind of, just if you assume Chris Paul plays Chris Paul's normal minutes, Booker looks good, but then the ceiling's even higher because there is certainly some in-game injury risk for Chris Paul.
DB Villain says Booker's not a playmaker. He's a pure scorer, a pure shooting guard. That's not true. I mean, we've seen Devin Booker take on a facilitating role countless times throughout his career.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a Chris Paul type playmaker, but he does benefit. Like he does it when Chris Paul.
Dude, he had
done it when he's the point guard.
He had back-to-back seasons with 30+% assist rates. That's not a pure shooter.
He's at like 26.5% without Paul on the floor this year.
Yeah, that's a very solid number. He's averaged almost 7 assists per game in 2018 and 2019, and that was with, we had Rubio the one year, right? But still, you had Devin Booker handling a lot more responsibility. Chris Paul is going to take all of that away from you, and rightfully so. He's one of the best point guards to ever play the game. But I'm with you on Booker here, and that's why I brought it up, because that was just super uncharacteristic of him to have such a modest performance as a playmaker. And sure, he scored 31 points, but I would expect him to do even more from a facilitating standpoint today if that happens to be the case and Chris Paul is limited, which leads me to the next natural question here is, what do we do with Cameron Payne?
To me, Payne is too expensive to really take a shot on unless you're just like 150 maxing and you're just building some what if Chris Paul plays one quarter lineups. The thing for me is that Payne is priced up enough where if he plays another 32 minutes like he did last game, he probably pays off a $4,800 or $5,300 salary depending on your site, but you don't have a whole lot of wiggle room there. If he plays 25, 26 minutes, he probably isn't really doing anything that's that useful. And, there's certainly the potential for him to go back to playing 20, 22 minutes if Paul is a full go. So, larger field, super top heavy tournaments, you can kind of get away with, to some extent, playing anybody on a 3-game slate that is going to play potentially meaningful minutes. But in terms of smaller field stuff or trying to cut down your lineups, if you're not a 150 max player, I don't really see a whole lot of value in chasing those minutes from Cameron Payne. Because for example, you can just go to Goran Dragic or you can go to Dante DiVincenzo at basically the same price point, getting the minutes that you're right. You're getting the minutes that you're praying Cameron Payne gets.
For sure. Listen, lightning generally doesn't strike twice in the same place when it comes to something like this. And to use Ben Rasa's famous line, paraphrasing, you not only have to get it right that Chris Paul doesn't play his normal allotment of minutes, you also have to get it right that Cameron Payne does something great or good enough in those minutes. And then to add on to that, you have to hope that he does more than Goran Dragic and Dante DiVincenzo. You have to hit the trifecta there. And it's not that it can't happen. It happened the other day, but happening twice, and Chris Paul has had another couple days to recover from that stinger. It just doesn't really seem worth it on this slate, where last slate that you could see a lot more purpose to a play like that.
Yeah, and also, obviously this can change between now and lock. We have Cameron Payne projected for 16.5% ownership on DraftKings. We have Goran Dragic projected for 19.5%. Why would anyone ever be clicking on Cameron Payne instead of Goran Dragic? Assuming that information ends up being close to accurate.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one more thing. Last time, I believe this was a 2-game slate. We have Cameron Payne at 9%. I think you were looking at Cam Johnson.
No, I just hadn't refreshed.
Oh, okay. We have him at 9.4%. Goran Dragic at 22. But honestly,
I was looking at Fanduel, I think. Maybe.
Oh, were you? Okay. Even so, Goran Dragic is $300 more expensive. Close game, you're getting 30 minutes from him, and he's a good player. Yeah.
So it does. Now that I realize I wasn't looking at DraftKings, it makes more sense at 9% than at 16. But still, it's just. It's a low probability play. Are there ways for Cameron Payne still to get there? Sure, he could play alongside Chris Paul. He can play really well. He can, Chris Paul can get hurt. There's still ways for him to get there. It's just that he's, I think his price has gone up as a result of Paul's injury, whereas like Chris Paul is priced to be hurt sort of. So like, to me, especially like looking at that DraftKings ownership, I would rather play 10% Chris Paul at 7,400 than 9% Cameron Payne at 4,800.
Yeah, that's a good point too. We are, what are we, 55 likes away from 300. Appreciate all you that hit that already. If you came in late and forgot to do so, I'll give you the benefit of that. You just forgot. Help us get over 300. Now we're 54 away. We got 1,700 people watching the show today. Welcome to all of you who came in a little bit late. Let's break down the rest of Phoenix here with DeAndre Ayton, who has actually stepped his game up pretty considerably defensively, and he's playing a ton of minutes. I didn't think he'd shoot another 90%, 91%, and he didn't. He shot 85% on 11 for 13 last time out.
Yeah, things that happen when Andre Drummond is the opposing center. But but yeah, I mean, I think Ayton is still pretty underpriced here given the playing time you're getting. Like on a per minute basis in these two games, he still hasn't been great. He's been fine, but kind of pretty much in line with what he's done during the regular season, where he averaged 1.08 DraftKings points per minute in games with Booker and Paul. But $6,300 on DraftKings for a guy that clearly has a path to playing 40 minutes here, it looks really good. Around $8K, I think a little cheaper maybe on FanDuel. But there's no guarantee he gets that many minutes, but at his price point, I don't think he needs it. Like, as long as you're getting 34, 35 minutes from DeAndre Ayton, you should on average be okay at this salary. And there's obviously the potential for him to do better. So I think it's a very, very good price, again, especially on DraftKings for DeAndre Ayton.
Jacob says, yeah, Dragic actually blows unless it's garbage time. Basically the same per minute production as Cameron Payne this year. And Cameron Payne, in the event that he gets these additional minutes, will be playing alongside starters, and wouldn't be shocking to see that per minute production dip a little bit.
And Cameron Payne's per minute production actually is influenced by garbage time, whereas Goran Dragic normally finds himself on the bench.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. Right. But you stated it better than I did. But right, Cameron Payne's getting real minutes today. He's going to be playing alongside actual good basketball players and against even better basketball players in the LA Lakers. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Wrap up the Suns for me. Anything we haven't hit on? Yeah.
Mikal Bridges is the small forward version of Dante DiVincenzo and Goran Dragic. Like 5,200 on DraftKings, 5,300 on FanDuel. Only played 26.5 minutes last game, but played 40 in the first game. Typically, during the regular season and in competitive games, you were seeing mid-30s from him. So I think it's more likely than not that you see mid-30s here from Bridges. He's around a 0.8 fantasy point per minute guy. Just another piece where you're not going to be real happy about getting him, but it sort of helps round out your lineup. You can go down a tier to Jay Crowder, riskier option, I think, than Bridges, but, also less expensive. And the same can be said for Cameron Johnson, who's 3,700, probably plays around 24 minutes. I don't think that you should be very confident in going to him, but he is, of the sub 4K guys, I think one of the better value options that, at least has a chance at success.
Okay. I had one more question for you. Let me see if I can remember it here. Pulling up the Phoenix ownership. Where was it? Okay, never mind. Ownership adjusted, and there was someone that was considerably higher than I thought he should be earlier, but that has come down, so we're good to move on. Before we do and get to the Lakers, if you haven't checked out Awesemo.com's free premium content, what I mean by that is it's premium content, but each day we rotate stuff, putting it in front of the paywall. So if you're not a premium sub yet, maybe you're not in a position to do so yet, but you want to check out some of the stuff we have to offer and incorporate it into your approach, incorporate it into your research and all of that. Well, we have the NBA player rankings free today in front of the paywall, MLB top stacks. It's one of my favorite tools on the site, and the NHL player and stack rankings, all of those free over at Awesemo.com. And maybe you do want to check out everything we have behind paywall, from the ownership projections, player projections, the top stack tool for all sports, including football, baseball, and any other sport, hockey, that includes stacking as a way to win, the boomer bust tool, the lineup builder, the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, which is so huge to anyone looking to learn the MME, to learn to play multiple lineups without having to hand build them. Lineup builders, if you want to play 1, 2, 3 lineups, 5 lineups, and hand build them yourself. So many different approaches you can take, so many different tools, all of them built by the #1 ranked DFS player and used by him as well, Alex Baker, Awesemo himself. So check it out, awesemo.com/join, whether it's a weekly, monthly, annual, single sport, all sport, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, MMA, PGA, golf, everything. They got contests. We got content for it over at Awesemo. So check it out. And if you have any questions about signing up, what subscription is right, whatever is going on, my DMs are open over on Twitter. So feel free to hit me up. All right, let's talk about the Lakers, starting with Anthony Davis, who, dude, last game, there was all of this, hey, can't go to AD. The guy's been awful. And he pulled an AD move and just had a huge game. Amazingly, on 15 field goal attempts. Did you see how many free throws he attempted in that game?
21.
18 for 21. Isn't it amazing when you have a guy like AD or Joel Embiid or Harden, they can have such low shot volume in a game, but get to the line so much and just get free points out of it to finish with 34 like he did.
Yeah. On a side note, or semi-related to that, did you realize that Joel Embiid had 3 free throws yesterday and no other starter on the Sixers had 1?
Yes. That was really one of the crazier things I've seen in a long time. And not just that no other starter had one, but that Embiid only had 3 too.
Yeah.
It was just, it was really
on the Wizards post game, they were just railing on them. Like you cared so little on defense that you didn't even foul anybody.
Right. Like, is that an indictment on the Sixers not being able to draw fouls, or on Washington giving them everything they wanted? I'm assuming it's the latter, since they lost by 25.
Yeah. I think Washington just wasn't close enough to foul anybody.
Yeah. I'm a Tulsa dog, says Laffy would be manning the guillotine in 1760s France. I'm not necessarily sure what you're insinuating with that, but I guess it's better than having my head under it. So thanks, Tulsa dog. Go ahead with Anthony Davis, because this is a big spot again today against the Suns.
Yeah, looking at his ownership, I think he's a really good tournament play. And the reason that I think his ownership is as low as it is right now, projected about 12% on DraftKings, is he doesn't make a lot of sense as a play when you think about it just in terms of projections. Like in terms of median projections, Davis is fine at his salary at $9,700 on DraftKings, a little over $10K on Fanduel. The reason that I say it doesn't make a lot of sense is in the games that Davis plays with LeBron, he's averaged about 1.3 DraftKings points per minute. You're probably getting 38 to 40 minutes from him in this game, assuming it's competitive. When you look at the pricing on guys like Nikola Jokic, Giannis Antetokounmpo, LeBron, they're all better per minute players at very similar price points, playing very similar minutes. So even though Davis isn't overpriced, he's overpriced relative to these other pay-up guys. And there's certainly not an abundance of value tonight to make it easy to get to a lot of them. So it's going to make it, you kind of have to choose between guys. And Davis, I think, deservedly so, is going to fall down the board behind those other guys. But you're talking about a 3-game slate where you can roster Anthony Davis. You can roster 38 to 40 minutes of Anthony Davis at 12%. You just need him to beat LeBron. You just need him to do what he did last game. If he scores 67 points tonight, he's in the tournament winning lineup pretty much every time, I think. So, he's not the most likely to succeed out of that price range, but the gap isn't really that big when you consider the talent level and the opportunity that Davis has. So I do think that getting him in tournaments makes sense. I also would be very surprised if I get to him in cash games.
The ownership, again, just really, really low. And, to some extent you look at it and you somewhat understand, because you say, all right. And you kind of just illustrated this perfectly. You have Giannis, you have Jokic, you have LeBron on the same team. There's just so many good top tier options today, even working into that like lower or upper mid range or lower top tier with Butler and Dame and Devin Booker and stuff like that. Anthony Davis kind of just falls by the wayside, just as he did last time he played. And we all saw what happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the perfect spot where you have to think about what type of contest you're playing and what you need, because Anthony Davis certainly has the ability to be the highest scorer on the slate. He's also probably the 3rd or 4th or 5th most likely guy to do so. So if you're in a format where you're just trying to be right more than 50% of the time, you don't really need Davis. If you're in a format where you get rewarded at a very high rate for taking on some risk, then Davis makes a lot of sense at low ownership.
What about LeBron here?
Yeah, he's, I think, kind of similar to Davis, except, looks a little bit better. He's averaged just shy of 1.5 fantasy points per minute in the games he's played with Davis this year. I assume you're going to get something like 36 to 38 minutes from him if this game's competitive. He's really good, obviously, but he's not quite as expensive as Giannis. He's not quite as expensive as Jokic, but he is in the ballpark, and he is more expensive, like you were saying, a lot more expensive than Jimmy Butler. So you kind of can go down the Butler if you want. You can go up to one of those other guys in a lot of builds. So it's going to keep his ownership in check, I think. He's getting about close to twice as much ownership on DraftKings as Davis is. I don't really think I think that gap might be a little bit too big. But again, if I'm only rostering one, I do lean toward LeBron just because he is the better producer on average. He is giving you, assists. He's giving you scoring. So yeah, I think, slight edge to LeBron over Davis, but not a really big one.
This whole team, like if you're just looking at every team on this slate and just sorting by, say, aggregate ownership, is there any team that's getting less combined ownership than the LA Lakers tonight?
I'd be surprised. They're like the only team that I don't have a lot to talk about outside of James and Davis. I mean, you can point to Dennis Schroeder at 5,800 on DraftKings. He played 34 minutes in the first game. He played he played 33 and a half last game. So I mean that looks good, and 5,800 is a perfectly fine price tag. But he's another guy where you have to keep in mind that if you look at his average production for the season, he wasn't playing nearly as many minutes alongside both of James and Davis as he's going to in the postseason. So you go from someone that, maybe is a 1 fantasy point per minute guy to like 0.85 fantasy points per minute. Can he still get it done at 5,800 in 34 minutes? Absolutely. But you have to account for the fact that he's playing a lot more minutes alongside the stars here.
What would you have set the spread for Portland and Denver before looking at anything for tonight's game out there in Portland?
Having no idea really what's happened in the series. I really have no idea.
Oh, well, don't do that. Don't let the viewers down.
I mean, and I know the spread now too, because I just looked. Denver by like 2 probably.
Okay. That's I would have thought maybe this is a pick 'em today. Okay. Right now, like you said, the series has bounced back and forth, but the Nuggets are 3.5 point dogs in this one against the Portland Trailblazers at 227. We'll dive into that. We got about 11 minutes to go on today's show, but as you know, it ain't over after this is over, because Live Before Lock's coming up right after us. They're taking you all the way up till 7:30 tip-off. You got Chris Spags, you got Greg Ehrenberg. They're going to make it happen. Jordan Klein behind the virtual glass. We got to get that. We got to get that producer cam so you can get canceled for wearing that hat. Oh, it's an awful hat. It's really not. But yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I'd like to say something real quickly though before we dive into it, and it's about Prize Picks. They're sponsoring today's show, and I must say, I was checking out just the interface today. It is smooth over there on Prize Picks. Very, very smooth. Some of them you can't really say that about them, but Prize Picks, it looks nice. It's very simple to use, and I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's the simplest fantasy game on the market. You don't have to worry about sharks, optimizers, mass multi-entry. Maybe you've been getting smoked lately and you're looking for a way to win some money. All you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board. The board being props, whether it's points, rebounds, assists, or fantasy points. Take the over or take the under their projected score. If you correctly select a 5-player lineup, you can net up to 10x your money or 10x your entry fee. So NFL, NBA, esports, Prize Picks has everything. So you can combine your picks across all sports available to put them in your lineup. Download the mobile app in the App Store or Google Play. It's online as well. If you were to go over to prizepicks.com, it just looks really nice. The app looks really nice. I think you'll enjoy it. If you haven't done so yet, download it, go to the website, and get your deposit bonus, because this is what everyone's worried about, right? When you use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, you receive your first deposit bonus instant deposit bonus of up to $100 when you use that promo code. So simplify daily fantasy with Prize Picks today. I was looking over there, Adam, and I saw Nikola Jokic with a points prop. We can dive right into this Denver team. Points prop of 32.5 today. I mean, that is a monster number for Jokic, who was shot wildly efficient and had 38 in only 31 minutes last game.
Yeah, that's a pretty high number, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Matter of fact, as good as he's been, I like the under. He's only averaging 9 potential assists in this series. I get that Jamal Murray's out, but Jamal Murray, you want to talk about a guy that's not really a playmaker. It's kind of like a de facto point guard, kind of Jamal Murray. I think Jokic could resort more towards playmaking, get back to where he was at, and still have a huge game. But he has to be very efficient, and he has to really give up those playmaking duties to get over that. So give me the under on 32.5 points. It scares me, but that's where I'm going. Now, the great thing about Jokic, though, Adam, is he could have 25 points, 23, and still have 70 fantasy points.
Yeah, he's, again, just a great option here. Certainly a more favorable matchup than Giannis has going up here against the Blazers. The only real, so I had 2 concerns I mentioned in the deep dive today. They're both minor, but they are, when you're kind of trying to split hairs between these guys at the top, I think they're worth mentioning. For one, we haven't seen quite as many minutes from Jokic as you have these other guys. Jokic played about 35, 36 minutes in the first game. In the second game, he played 31 minutes, lost like 3 minutes to garbage time. So again, was going to play around 35 minutes or so. When you potentially have Giannis playing 40, when you have Anthony Davis or LeBron potentially playing 38 to 40, that is something to keep in mind. But again, Jokic in 13 games this year without Jamal Murray and without Will Barton has averaged 1.73 DraftKings points per minute, and he has a better matchup than really any of those guys. So I still think Jokic is one of the top plays on the slate. The other slightly negative thing is that you do have that really deep mid-range of center where you have DeAndre Ayton, you have Yusuf Nurkic on the other side of this game with a high ceiling, you have Bam Adebayo at a reasonable price tag. So you could potentially just kind of, save some money at center, pay up at one of the weaker positions, whether that's guard or forward, and have, a little bit higher ceiling in your lineup. But those are kind of, just nitpicking on what we've seen so far. There's certainly no guarantee that, like, Jokic isn't limited to 35 minutes. I don't think. You certainly could see him play more minutes at any given time. So just kind of, slight negatives to point out, but all in all, a great spot, a great play, nothing, bad to say about it.
King-609 with the super chat asks, is Howard viable in FanDuel cash at point guard today, Adam?
Who?
Marcus Howard.
Oh.
At first I was like, wait, Dwight's not on this slate.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I know, it's just why it's tough to even think about somebody like Marcus Howard, but he played 20 minutes in game 1, 15 minutes in game 2, just super low shot volume, 0 peripheral stats.
Yeah, I don't really see it. It's another one of those where, like I was saying at the beginning of the show, I just think you end up a lot of times on these playoff slates, you're going to end up with better lineups if you just hope that nobody scores 80 fantasy points in a playoff game or something, and going to kind of take what's there. You don't need to force in, you don't need to build the lineups exactly the way you would during the regular season. Like, a lot of times I think you're going to be better off taking those 40 minutes from Jimmy Butler and 40 minutes or 35 minutes from some 6K guy like DeAndre Ayton than you are going with hoping you get 20 minutes from a guy who wasn't even in Denver's rotation for most of the year, just so you compare him with Jokic or something. Like, it's, to me, it's just a different build. I don't think it's totally necessary to go that route.
We're almost at 2,000 viewers. When we get to 2,000, can we got to have, I was going to say 500, but even 400 likes here. When you're talking about the ratio, like, just the ratio right now, rough. What are we at? We're at 9. We're not even at 20%. So let's bump that up here. Appreciate all of that in advance. Subscribe too. We just eclipsed 55,000 subscribers, well on our way to 500,000. Adam, what are we doing outside of Jokic and outside of Marcus Howard here for the Denver Nuggets?
So I think that there's some the other spot primarily is Michael Porter Jr., who is very favorably priced, 7,500 power forward on FanDuel, small forward power forward eligible, 7,100 on DraftKings. We saw him play about 32 minutes in the blowout. He played 36 or 37 in the competitive game. I think he's a strong option here. We know he has a high ceiling. He's averaged 1.16 DraftKings points per minute in 12 games without Murray and Barton this year. He does enough scoring wise. He rebounds well enough. He certainly can put up a monster game. So I think Porter looks pretty good. Outside of that, I think it's tough to get too excited about anybody. JaMychal Green's getting some ownership. He's 3,300. He's another one of these guys where, certainly you can build some lineups where you do go more stars and scrubby and you get to someone like JaMychal Green, but so often you're just going to get that 15, 16, 17 fantasy point game that doesn't really do a whole lot for you, especially because on a 3-game slate, there's limited value options. So like people that build a lineup with that construction, they're just going to go to JaMychal Green because there's not really a whole lot else down there. And so it's not that he's like super high owned, but there's a lot of overlap within the JaMychal Green lineups. Like you're playing the same players because of the salary you're using. So, again, it's okay to go there. It's okay to roll the dice on an Austin Rivers on a 3-game slate, but it's not really my preferred way to go. I would rather stick to the mid range here, hope to, get to some of these pay up guys, maybe get, one into a lineup. But I think kind of like we saw yesterday, it's another slate where as long as you kind of don't get unlucky and one of these expensive guys outperforms their projection by 15 or 20 points, I think you'll be okay not forcing in those cheap guys.
Ready to wrap this one up with the Trailblazers?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. Damian Lillard, a playoff Dame. No one calls him that, but I think they should. There's playoff P. What about Damian Lillard? Granted, I'm not saying his playoff resume is really all that spectacular, but he's just done a lot of incredible things. And did you see I'm sure you saw the half court shot. No. You didn't? Oh yeah. Just pulling up. Jordan, you saw it, right? Pulling up from basically inside the circle. He just does things that are fun. And outside of Steph Curry, I'm going to say this right now. I don't care what you guys say. Most of you will agree with me. Outside of Steph Curry, Damian Lillard is the most exciting player to watch in basketball. There, I said it, Adam.
I don't disagree. I think I put Westbrook in there.
Yeah, Westbrook.
Exciting for a different reason, though.
Westbrook's fun for sure, but just from like a pure holy shit, did he just do that? Like,
right. Westbrook's fun because he just speeds up the entire game, basically.
Yeah. And
but
whoever looks as good as Westbrook, but
right. But yeah, Lillard, I'm with you. Like if you're just watching a game and it's just like nobody takes over a game like Lillard does or like Curry does.
Yeah. And LeBron's obviously up there. He does some crazy shit too.
But he does it when he takes over a game. It's like in the post and with dunks and stuff, which is fun. But he's
barreling through people in the paint.
Yeah. When Dame gets hot, he just keeps pulling up from the logo and hitting threes. Like
I know it's nuts.
It's hilarious.
All right. I don't want to take up too much time because we got to go and we're up against it. I'll let you wrap us up with the Portland Trailblazers. I know you can be succinct, but also give us some fantastic information in the little time we have.
Yeah, I think this is a really underpriced team here. Dame, of course, if you can get there, he looks good, especially 9,400 on DraftKings. But where I think they really start to be underpriced is outside of Dame. 7,300 from a column across the board. He's probably playing 38 minutes or so, assuming this game's competitive. He's well over a fantasy point per minute guy, even in the games that he's played with Lillard and Nurkic. So I think he looks like a really good value. Nurkic, I think, is a good play. He's a 1.34 DraftKings point per minute guy. The only real concern with Nurkic is was playing around 30 minutes per game to close out the regular season. We saw him play about 33 minutes in the game that he didn't foul out of in this series. So, if he does avoid foul trouble, I think it's safe to say he gets another 32 to 34 minutes. But is that enough to beat out, DeAndre Ayton if he gets close to 40? Is it enough to beat out Bam Adebayo and not that much more salary? So I think Nurkic is a really good play. The minutes do concern me a little bit. Robert Covington at 4,400 on DraftKings, I think 4,500 on Fanduel. One of the better point per dollar values, I think. Not that you're expecting a lot out of him, but he's a 3/4 fantasy point per minute guy for the season. He's played 34 and 37 minutes in this series. He's someone that you expect to be out there for a lot of minutes, and he's pretty cheap. Norman Powell, 5,400 on DraftKings, I think is a good value as well. He should get around 36 minutes if this game's competitive. He's averaged 0.8 DraftKings points per minute since joining the Blazers. So, I think, again, any amount of Dame you get to is fine. He's Damian Lillard. He has a massive ceiling. He's great. But where I'm really interested is McCollum and Nurkic as far as mid-range guys, Covington as far as value, and then getting to some Norman Powell as well at small forward.
All right. Josh says Zion's more exciting than Dame.
Nope.
Yeah, that's almost as bad as your book burning take. I tell you that much. Thanks for watching.
Zion's like Westbrook, except not running as fast on the fast break.
Like, he's definitely fun, and you go, wow, how did he do that? But the thing is, he's just going to do the same thing the next game. With Dame, he does things that you could never imagine happening.
Zion is impressive. Dame is exciting.
I like that. That's solid. That's very solid. Hey, guys, until YouTube fixes the algorithm, I know you hate this, but I got to do it. We're over 2,000 viewers. We got to get to 500. So no, Josh isn't even up yet, but still, we got 35 to go. Do me those honors. Good luck tonight. We'll see you back here tomorrow to close out the work week. Spags and Greg coming up next on the Live Before Lock. This has been the Deeper Dive presented by Prize Picks. Good luck tonight, everyone.
What is up, guys? You got about 56 minutes left until the lock time today, and we are here for you for one more show about today's 3-game NBA slate, and we are ready for it here. I am Chris Spags, joined by a man who I saw a mere, I don't even know, 7 or 8 hours ago, but it all blurs together in the name of quality content and DFS talk. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, well, I mean, as of course, because everything we do is ultra significant. I had a baseball slate. We're almost to the penny. I broke even today, which made all of the content we did and all the time that was put into and all the other things we fretted about totally worth it in the end. But nothing better than a sweat where actually we get into the bottom of the 10th inning of the last game. And I'm trying to figure out what needs to happen for me to break even exactly. And that was my big sweat for the day so far.
Did you see the one Javi Baez play that I was all over Twitter today where he was almost thrown out at first base, then ran around? And really, if you haven't seen it on for you guys out there, I know it's an NBA show, but the wildest, and honestly, if every MLB play were like that, I think we would be spiking the views a lot more for those shows.
Yeah, that was best play of the season so far.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. So check that one out. And make sure to check out our MLB shows. If you like Greg and myself as well, we do the strategy show 3 days a week. I think 3, maybe 4. I don't even know. It all blurs together, but lots of great shows here and lots of great content on the channel. So subscribe and hit that like button if you can, guys. Right now, we do have over 1,800 people right now, just shy of 1,900. And it'd be nice if you guys get us over 600 likes right now. We're at 540. Easy number to hit. So hit that like button here. Help us stoke it up. And also make sure that you are playing on Prize Picks today because that is the sponsor of this show. And we've talked about them a lot more recently. They are a newer sponsor here, but we've been getting requests for a while to get more Prize Picks content into the mix because it's really a different format for you guys on there where simplest fantasy game on the market is what they call themselves. And I think you might agree where you can say goodbye to sharks, lineup optimizers, and mass multi-entry. All you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, 5 players available on the board to go over or under on their projected scores. So think of it more like you're building a parlay of however many guys you want to go to. So you're not playing a full lineup like you would elsewhere. You correctly select the player, 5-player lineup. And if you do that, you'll win a 10x net on your entry fee. So that's a big value return for yourself. NFL, NBA, esports, MLB, all the sports you're looking for are going to be on Prize Picks. You can combine your picks across all those sports as well. If you are somebody who's playing MLB and NBA, you can combine them for yourself, do a cross-sport parlay, basically is what it is over at Prize Picks. Download the mobile app in the App Store or on Google Play today and make your first deposit to get an instant deposit match up to $100. So if you put in $100, get $100 back, and that is a great way to build your bankroll on these newer sites, especially if you are a little bit tilted over the Draftkings and Fanduels of the world. Check out Prize Picks on there where you're just playing 1 or 2 props together, or up to 5, but still you are playing less just in competition with yourself, less in competition with others out there. That is a big benefit on there. So go check them out. Use that promo code Awesemo for the $100 deposit match over at Prize Picks. And Greg, let's get into the slate here because I think we have some ones on there. A guy that I would not want to touch on Prize Picks, but I'm going to lead the show with because I saw our guy Tony Porcelli talking in chat, a street preacher debating the merits of Robert Covington, thankfully landing on a positive outcome for both those guys. But Robert Covington to me might be the most important player on the slate, and I absolutely hate it. And I know it's a weird way to lead a live before lock. I know, especially with the chat, who really will crap all over us when we talk about these not great players who are important. But in recent days, we've seen Danny Green be a mediocre player who was in a winning lineup. We've seen Jay Crowder have a mediocre effort in a winning lineup. We've seen enough of these games now in the playoffs, Greg, where Covington, I think, sucks. He hasn't had a use rate above 10% so far in these 2 playoff games, but I do think at his price tag for the configuration that he represents and the chance that he should at some point be closer to his median projection that he's been at all year, I do feel like Covington is a play where you're either putting him in a lot or you're putting him in a little. And I, unfortunately, be putting Robert Covington in a lot.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you. And also, if you look at the usage rate, while it's really low, it's not that much of a concern because that's what he did all of the regular season. And if you look at his numbers for the regular season, over the course of the entire regular season, he didn't miss any games. So we have a really big sample size here. He played 32 minutes per game. He averaged 25 DraftKings points per game and only had an 11% usage rate. So the usage is low. That's to be expected. But he's playing more minutes than those 32 in the playoffs. The last 2 games, he's played 37 and 34 minutes. So for me, I have Robert Covington projected to play 36 minutes today, given what we've seen from him in the last 2 playoff games. And even though the usage is low, even if he isn't the best points per minute fantasy producer in the world, he's very cheap. And then 36 minutes is going to get him, to me at least, somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 to 28 fantasy points, which given his price point, also the lack of value we have on the slate, how hard it is to find cheap guys to roster, it makes him one of the best plays. And I understand he hasn't played well in the last couple of games, but I mean, you look at the broader sample size of the entire season, and he's a little bit too cheap.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because he's going to be a very chalky play on both DraftKings and Fanduel today. We will do some money time at the halfway point of the show, give away the top 5 plays on DraftKings and Fanduel, of course, and our ownership projections that you can always get for yourself at Osmo.com/join. And it sucks because being with a chalky Covington is not my favorite thing in the world, though I do think this is a play with Covington where it wouldn't shock me to see if we're overshooting the ownership a little bit, just because I see the chat's reaction. And I know like chat, it's not to say like, oh, you guys aren't sharp or whatever, but it's more we have sort of the wisdom of the crowd here where when you see a lot of people talking about something, there's a decent chance it's how the field's going to approach it. And I do think Covington, the ownership projections that we have for him sort of reflect the idealistic worldview that Greg and I are talking about, where, you're going to put this guy in because he makes the lineups work. He has a decent median projection. But I think so many people think Covington sucks and will look at those box scores and see no results. That to me, this is the day where you play him. And if it's a break spot, like you can't be surprised by it because it's happened enough times. But as somebody to me who's played Covington the last 2 games, I'm sort of willing to get there. And then that's the way it's just going to be for hopefully a good amount of you guys as well tonight too. Greg, is there anybody else who kind of fits this Covington criteria for you? I would throw Monty Morris in the mix a little bit as one of those guys, but is there anybody who's just sort of not the most appealing? Dante DiVincenzo, I think the best version of this, but guys who just sort of fit your lineup construction in a way that they're more important than you would have realized just on the surface of who they are as a play.
Yeah, so I mean, when you talk about some of these cheap guys, the issue becomes twofold. Number one is that we just don't have very reliable value plays at this point in the season. We're just basically looking for who is a guy who that's cheap is going to play a lot of minutes. They're viable. That's basically the qualifications for a value play at this point of the season, especially when you consider the pay-up options that we have to choose from. There's a lot of them. We have Giannis, we have Jimmy Butler, we have Nikola Jokic, we have Damian Lillard. There's guys we want to pay up for. And realistically, if you don't like Robert Covington, if you don't like somebody like Monty Morris, where are you going to save salary? Are you just building balanced lineups? I don't really think that's particularly ideal when we're going to have, Giannis potentially playing 40 minutes, Jokic potentially playing, 38 minutes, Butler playing over 40 minutes. I think we kind of have to pay up for some of these guys. We need the salary saving somewhere. And we don't need the Covingtons, the Monty Morrises, these types of guys in the world to go out and score, 30 fantasy points, even somewhere around 20 fantasy points at these guys' salary could be acceptable depending on what the high end guys do. But more getting back to what your question was about guys who in the same vein as Covington, I agree. Monty Morris is going to be another one. Maybe like Norman Powell for me. He's somebody who kind of fits in that mix, somebody who I don't think has very stable usage playing alongside CJ McCollum, Jusuf Nurkic, and Damian Lillard, but just where the price point is, I'm getting to him a decent amount. Duncan Robinson, who I haven't really liked that much in the playoffs, but I think this is a spot where the Heat are going to need shooting to keep up with the Bucks, so I think he could play a few extra minutes. So none of these guys I feel comfortable with, but all of them are guys that wind up in a good portion of my lineups.
Yeah, I'm with you on most of those guys too. Goran Dragic, one that I do think is a better play and is a guy who, should sort of be relying on a bit more with Miami's backs very much against the wall in their series. But I think too, he's another guy that just sort of fits the construction. And I think that's something that I would try to impress on people is that in particular for these playoff rounds is how the pricing has been on the sites is that you really have to be a little more agnostic about some of these guys and just kind of trust the numbers and hope that you hit that median projection. And I think, with some of these guys in Covington, I'll beat the drum of the most because he just had 2 terrible games. He's certainly expending a lot of effort on his defensive side of the equation for himself, but I think the results of last game didn't quite get there. And I think for Covington, this could be a day where maybe he pulls up a little more as well as some of these other guys just sort of make your lineups work. What are we paying up for though, Greg? Because I think that's the question that becomes important to everybody. You mentioned some guys out there, and I feel like we can go maybe one by one through some of them, but I do think Giannis is going to be the play that to me is the hardest to get away from. I like Nikola Jokic on paper, but to me, Giannis is the one who just sort of projected the best amidst, relative to ownership sorting and all of that I'm doing on my Excel spreadsheet today. But I would say to me, Giannis is the priority pay up option. It sucks because I do have some concern that maybe Giannis is not in the optimal because he's so expensive and you are forcing in a little more crappy value to get there. But I do think Giannis would be the guy that I consider the premier pay up for the day. But are you feeling similarly or are you going a different direction with your high price studs?
No, I have Giannis projected for a good amount more fantasy points than Damian Lillard and Nikola Jokic. It was the same case for me the other day when we saw these same guys on the same slate. And it's just a case of with Giannis, he's been the best fantasy producer in the league over the last few seasons, but just the minutes have never really been secure. And now we've seen Mike Budenholzer in the playoffs is finally giving his starters a bigger leash to play big minutes. So the thing to me that really was encouraging about Giannis's fantasy production and the Bucks' potential for future championship contention, the first game of the playoffs, overtime game against the Heat, he plays over 40 minutes in regulation, ends up playing 45 and a half minutes. If we could say if this game is competitive, by the way, 1.5 point spread, we're going to expect it to be competitive. I have to expect if Giannis avoids foul trouble, he's playing somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 minutes. that just wipes the floor with every other high-priced option, given what we've seen from Giannis on a permanent basis the last few seasons.
Yeah, and I think that's my logic too. I am a believer. I mentioned this on the tip-off show. We did the abridged version today with just me and Ben Rasa, and I talked about how, to me, Jimmy Butler, Ben is very well invested in the Bucks sweeping the series, and I think at least 3-0. I think he has. I think he might have bets on both sides. Actually, that's classic Ben Rasa. But I would say for my purposes, I think Miami wins this game, and I am a believer in the Heat. I do think they're better, as a sort of ceiling team. I do think the Vegas total gives me some hope too. They are projected for 3.7 more points than their season scoring average. Milwaukee on their side projected for 7.3 less points than their average. So I think that's something to note from the Vegas cosign perspective. And I do think Miami, they have to win this game. They can't go down 3-0. Miami knows that. They're about as fiercely competitive a team as it's going to be out there. And as a result, Jimmy Butler, a core part of what I'm doing. Dragic, a core part of what I'm doing. Tyler Hero, I think, is a very interesting, 1% low-owned dart throw, just kind of get in the mix a little in the hopes that he does get some run and maybe can shoot him back to the series. But Butler, I think, is a core part of what I'm doing. And I think if Butler is going to be a core part of what you're doing, I don't think there's a pathway for Miami to blow this game out. I really don't see that. And if that's the case, I think you have to be heavy on Giannis.
Yeah. So the other thing too about, you mentioned you don't think it's likely he'd blow them out. The first game of the series, the Bucks shot 16% from three. The Heat made 40% of their threes, and the Bucks still end up winning in an overtime game. So it is really hard to envision a scenario where the Heat really do run away with the game, because we've seen all of the luck go their way in a game this series, and the Bucks still ended up winning. So I agree. I think that's pretty unlikely to happen. As for your stance on Tyler Hero, I mean, sure, 1%, whatever. I find it hard to get to him, just given what we've seen from his playing time so far. 2 games this series, 19 minutes in an overtime game, and then 17.6 minutes last game. I think getting to Goran Dragic once again makes the most sense. He's the guy who I think they have the most confidence in from a playoff perspective, at least in the rotation. That's going to tie into, we got a super chat here from Zach Anderson, who's saying, do you like any none on DraftKings? I like none of none. It's an issue of the rotation in the playoffs. They have Kendrick Nunn getting minutes, Tyler Hero getting minutes, Goran Dragic getting minutes, Iguodala's getting minutes now. So with all these guys getting playing time, there just isn't that much upside to me in these other guys when we're seeing Dragic become more of a priority off the bench. So I think once again, we're going to see Tyler Hero and Kendrick Nunn in that 18 to 20 minute range, with Goran Dragic being the guy who gets the bulk of the run.
I did play actually, I'm with the field on on Nunn's ownership. He's projected for 10%. That's where I'm going to be on DraftKings as well. And I think that's a fine number to get to. I think there's some pathway for him to sort of shoot his way into more minutes, but I would agree the likely outcome is Dragic getting more run. And I think, to me, the Tyler Hero thing, just to defend that point a little bit, I don't think you should play a lot of him, but I just wanted to make sure in my optimization to get a little bit, because I think there is a pathway for him to be one of those guys. You'll compare him to Bryn Forbes perhaps and how he was hot. And I think we need to talk about Bryn Forbes next based on what I was seeing in the chat before the show. But I do think Tyler Hero is that guy where if we do get into desperation mode for Miami, there is definitely a world where Tyler Hero comes in, earns a few more minutes for himself. He just has to shoot well, which has really been the issue for him this series. And, there's certainly some other deficiencies he has in terms of defense, and his playmaking has been there at times, but not there consistently enough. I do think Hero is one of those guys where, if it gets to emergency situations, who's going to get you a bucket off the bench? They're not going to Max Strus. I think they're probably not to give Tyler Hero that shot. So that's sort of my defense point there. Talk to me. I guess we have some more Heat players we could talk about. And actually, one question that we'll hit on from Mr. Moneybags in the Premium Slack. And Premium Slack, of course, part of that Osmo Plus offering. So make sure you get in there for yourself if you are interested in being a part of the family here, part of the community. How many Heat players is too many for a DK GPP single entry with 500 entries? And he also asked us to rank them. I would say, to me, I would still kind of adhere to 3 Heat players max, Greg, but I don't know if you feel differently about that. And I guess let's answer that question first, and then we can do a little ranking.
I'm just looking through some of my lineups. I didn't set any rules, but just the way that the lineups are breaking out for me, I don't have any lineups with more than 3, and I only have a handful of lineups that have 3 Heat players. The priorities for me are Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, and Bam Adebayo. Other guys to mix in, like Duncan Robinson, but other than that, nobody else that I think warrants a significant amount of exposure.
Yeah, for me, the priorities would be Butler and Dragic. I think they're a clear 1 and 2 for where I'm looking at things. And I would say then behind them would be Duncan Robinson, who I don't hate. I'm going to be actually a little bit above the field, which I'm not crazy about, but I think he's a play in the mix. Bam, I'm getting less of because I think I'm going in a different direction at center that we can also talk about. DeAndre Ayton going to be a popular play today. He is a popular play for me as well. It's been projecting well all series, and that's worked out so far. So I'll be back on DeAndre Ayton today, and that's sort of hurting my Bam out of bio ownership, but I have no issue playing him either. Let's talk about Bryn Forbes because I think we need to here. He shot the lights out last game. He is still 3,100. He is a tempting player to go to, though the field projected to only be there at 5%. I think, Greg, knowing what we know of the field, knowing, again, what I've seen people talking about today, I don't think there's any chance of Bryn Forbes to recreate that day. And I will unfortunately put my neck on the line saying that out loud, but I don't think he has any chance to do it. And I also think he's going to end up closer to 10% than 5%, Greg. So give me your thoughts on Bryn Forbes. You think he'd shoot 8 for 12 from 3 again one more time?
No, probably not. And if he doesn't make those shots, he doesn't deliver anything else really of value. So last game, he played under 20 minutes as well as he shot last game. And I understand that there was a blowout involved also, but even so, it's not like Bryn Forbes is a core piece of this rotation with as deep as they are. He played 14 minutes in game 1. That game went to overtime. Overall for the season, Bryn Forbes, when he comes off the bench, he plays 18 minutes per game. He averages 13.6 DraftKings points. That's about what I would expect from Bryn Forbes today, although I actually have him playing 12 minutes today as opposed to the 13 he averages, just because, like I said before, we've seen from the Bucks in close games, Giannis is getting more minutes than we've seen in the past in the playoffs. Chris Middleton is getting more minutes than we've seen in the past in the playoffs. And it stands to reason that Jrue Holiday is going to play a bunch of minutes too if this game's competitive. It's a game with a 1.5 point spread. That's about as competitive as we could expect the game to be. So unless Bryn Forbes just comes out and shoots the lights out again, his minutes are going to be fairly capped, and same goes for his fantasy upside. He scored, let me see, was that his best fantasy game of the season last time?
I think so, because I don't think he's even topped that number when in those few games where he was starting when all the Bucks were out. So I find it hard to believe he'd have a better day this year.
Or he had one in that game where everybody sat and he started. He scored 32 fantasy points, and then he had one other game off the bench where he scored 34. But beyond that, we have, let's see, 3 games all season, one earlier in the year also. 3 games all year where he scored over 30 fantasy points. So now we're supposed to look at one playoff game where he scored 30 fantasy points and say, well, is that going to be the norm for him? And the answer to me is pretty clearly no. And also keep in mind the ownership for him last game. He was 1% owned across pretty much all GPPs on DraftKings FanDuel. He was sub 1% owned. And his ownership is probably going to be somewhere between 5 to 10x what that number was, based on nothing other than unsustainable shooting. Because nothing else has changed about Bryn Forbes' role. There's not something where the Bucks saw like, oh my God, Bryn Forbes is an 80% 3-point shooter now. Time to start him over Jrue Holiday. Like that's not a situation that's going to happen. So there's no reason to view Bryn Forbes differently heading into this slate than he did before last slate.
I think if Bryn Forbes had ended up playing like 35 minutes or something and then had that performance, you can go like, wow, okay, Bryn Forbes got a lot of court time, but he basically got a few minutes more than his normal run. And today's projected for 13.6 minutes by our Awesemo data team. And that's, based off of the longer term sample size of what he looks like in rotations with the guys they have available. And he also had a 28.5% usage in that game, which is more than his 18.5% usage. So a 10% jump there, but more than 10% relative to what his usage normally is. There's a lot of things for Forbes in that game. So, not to sort of beat the drum on Bryn Forbes or even try to like dampen the enthusiasm out there. If you want to play some Forbes, try to ride with the field, I guess. But to me, that's 5 to 10% you can save by just getting away from the field and just not taking that price tag, because it's just unlikely to see anything like that again. You're much more likely to get the median 9 fantasy point projection he's going to have pretty much anywhere you'll look today. Any of the Bucks value, guys? I guess while we're talking Forbes, because I know people like to think like this, so I'll ask the question for you. Would you play any Pat Connaughton? I saw somebody recommend that in chat. Would you play any PJ Tucker? Would you play another cheap buck in the hopes that maybe you can capture Jordan Nwora for the blowout here if the Bucks or the Heat somehow blow it out? Would you play another cheap buck to just try to get away from Forbes and maybe capture that magic one more time?
So not on DraftKings, but on FanDuel. So the other day I was doing live before lock with Alex, and he had brought up a point about Pat Connaughton that I ended up agreeing with, which was just that you look at the shooting guard pool on FanDuel, it's really thin. We have Devin Booker's a good play at the top. Then there's CJ McCollum, Dante DiVincenzo, Austin Rivers is the best cheap option, but that's it. You've got you have 4 legitimate options at shooting guard, and everything else is just kind of a crapshoot. Like you want to throw Tyler Hero in there, you want to throw Kendrick Nunn, okay, but there's no real reason to be all that confident in. And so there's a situation which we saw the other day where if the high price guys all fail, possibility that happens, Pat Connaughton can end up scoring 15 to 16 fantasy points and end up in the optimal lineup just because he's the cheapest guy out of a group of players that none of them project, outstandingly well. So, Dante DiVincenzo, for example, picking up 40% ownership on FanDuel. Does Dante DiVincenzo at 5,300 typically warrant that much ownership? The answer is no. It's just because the options are so thin at the position. So you can go contrarian and take a shot on somebody like Pat Connaughton, FanDuel specifically, really just because of positionality.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And to be clear, these guys were not advocating for these plays at all. We're just sort of giving you guys the thought process that I know people out there will have. So that's the view in it. Definitely these guys, though, either way, not ones you're trying to jam a bunch into lineups. And Connaughton, 2.6% owned on DraftKings, 7.6 on FanDuel. Those numbers are more than aggressive enough if you want to be where the field marker for Pat Connaughton will be. And PJ Tucker, 1% on both sides. So there you go for all the PJ Tucker fans out there. I'm sure there's so many. The rest of the Bucks, though, I mentioned DiVincenzo. He's a great play today on some of our partner sites out there. But also, I would say that on just DraftKings and FanDuel as well. I agree with your take on him. Like, I think he gets a few more minutes today because of Bryn Forbes not quite running as hot. He did sort of suffer a little bit in terms of run last game. That's something I know Alex also mentioned, I think, when you did that show with him, where and how he views things in the rotations. DiVincenzo is the one guy who sort of gets pulled away the most. But in this spot, I do think if I'm expecting Miami to be competitive, I do think Dante DiVincenzo sort of earns his way to more minutes. And that to me makes him look like a really solid play on DraftKings. On FanDuel, the ownership getting close to a little too onerous, but where are you landing with Dante DiVincenzo, projected for 25%-ish ownership on DraftKings and just shy of 38% on FanDuel?
Yeah, so like I said before, you look at the options at shooting guard on FanDuel and they suck. So I look at the Dante DiVincenzo ownership and ideally I'd be like, I don't want any of DiVincenzo. And then you build lineups. It's like, well, what am I doing if I don't roster Dante DiVincenzo? I'm getting like Taylor Horton Tucker or something. The other options are equally terrible. So I just am right around the field with DiVincenzo because I don't really see a way around it given what the options are.
And then some other plays here on the Bucks that I feel like we should just hit on because we're going to basically talk about every player over the course of this next 35 minutes or so. But we do have Chris Middleton projected for under 15% ownership on DK. I didn't get there, and it does give me a little concern just because I think the price tag does work. There is a world where Giannis underperforms, and maybe that does go Chris Middleton's way. I think, the narrative of him being a hero last game, I don't really care about that, but I do think the price tag, to me, makes him a viable pivot to Butler or addition to Butler. And Drew Holiday looks like a pretty solid value, but one that on a slate like this, I don't know that you get there a lot because of the price tag, but it does seem like he's a guy who could certainly get over 40 fantasy points and give you some work. And I think I would have liked to get a little more Drew Holiday than I did as well. So these two guys, Greg, to me, underrepresented because they're not really popping enough meaningfully in the optimization I did before the show. But how are you feeling about Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton? And I guess relate that as well, because we both were on the same boat about liking Giannis a lot. Are you willing to play these guys alongside Giannis, or using them as kind of a counterbalance if Giannis doesn't go off in the way we're expecting?
Yeah, I don't like either of them all that much on DraftKings. The issue being is that if I'm expecting Giannis to play that many minutes, that if I'm giving Giannis 40 minutes today, 38 minutes, like whatever you think Giannis plays, I think we should all be on the same page that as long as the game's competitive, he's going to play a ton. The more Giannis is on the court, it has to take away from everybody else because he does everything. He's the best scorer on the team. He's the best rebounder. He's overall the best playmaker on the team. So every time that whenever he's on the court, it's taking away fantasy production and possibility for other people to produce fantasy points, taking away possessions from everybody else, that it makes it kind of hard for me to like those guys from a projection standpoint when I'm giving Giannis that many minutes.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And if you get a little exposure to these guys, the field will be on them. It looks like no more than 20% on DraftKings, no more than 25% on FanDuel. So that's one way to get different today. And I do think Giannis is clearly going to be the safest option, clearly the one as well with the highest ceiling. But there's certainly some pathways here that he just kind of lays off. And you do see more Drew, more Chris Middleton today. Could pay off in some way. We got one question in the premium Slack from our guy Jeremiah Johnson asking who would be Dwayne Dedmon, aka he's also saying the Paul Blackburn play of the night. It's something we used to talk about in the MLB shows years ago for a crappy pitcher who could somehow find his way into a winning lineup. And Dedmon, I feel like it probably is Dedmon for the crappy guy who could find his way into a winning lineup. Like, I think I would take him over Bryn Forbes and just in terms of having that potential. And to be clear, I'm not playing very much. I don't think I actually got any shares of Dwayne Dedmon, but in that second half, he played some run alongside Bam Adebayo. And I don't know what the deal with that was. Might just been out of desperation because Dedmon was running hot and Bam's still a core part of what they're doing. But I think there's a pathway for Dedmon to be useful today. He certainly has to keep shooting what he was shooting, but he has been a 1.24 fantasy point per minute guy on the year. So I would say Dwayne Dedmon would be the Dwayne Dedmon of the night one more time, but still to me, Greg, a guy that I'm just not getting to at all.
Let's see, the Dwayne Dedmon play of the night. By the way, what I dislike about this is it's going to end up being whatever my answer is, somebody who I don't actually like or somebody I'm actually going to play. I have an answer that I'm really uncomfortable with, but I could see the avenue, and that's Marc Gasol. I still think that Gasol is the player who, every time I say this drives people crazy. And they want me to, whenever I bring up Marc Gasol, people are like, they say I should be fired. I shouldn't be allowed to talk about basketball on the internet anymore. But he is the center that to me fits best with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. He's a better defender than Montrezl Harrell or Andre Drummond. He's a better passer than those two. And his ability to shoot and space the floor gives them a dynamic that neither Gasol could bring, that neither Harrell nor Drummond bring to the table. So from a floor spacing perspective, I think he brings a whole other dynamic to the Lakers that neither of those other guys do. So I was happy to see Marc Gasol finally wind up back in the Lakers rotation last game. And he ended up playing pretty heavy run. I mean, relatively, he played 20 minutes. He went from out of the rotation to 20 minutes last game. There's definitely a risk that he gets a DNP, but 20 plus minutes from Marc Gasol, literally no ownership. I could see the path for him to be the Deadman play.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable way to look at it. I would also say Dario Saric out there in the mix too, because there's probably some world where Ayton gets in foul trouble. He's going to be chalkier today because he's been really good in the series so far. People are finally figuring that out. And then maybe Saric gets some more run for himself and ends up paying off the price tag with dual position eligibility. But again, we're talking about plays that are really flimsy. So if you want to take your stabs, these are all guys under 10% owned, and maybe we'll be able to be that Dwayne Dedman. But when you are taking these low owned guys, they're low owned for a reason. There's a good reason the chalk becomes the chalk, and that's because on paper they look like the best plays. So never forget that as part of your process. Let's talk about the Lakers a little more, and Phoenix, I guess, as well. And I think we need to let's do money time, and then we'll get into that afterwards. A little tease here. Hit that like button, guys. We're still just shy of 600, 587 now. We have over 2,000 people in here, so we appreciate each and every one of you being here. Legitimately, we do. So please hit that like button here. Get us over 600, an easy number to hit. And I will, let's see if Jordan's got the cash register sound effect ready, because it is, in fact, money time. And we got the update a couple hours ago, but it's still going to be as fresh as ever. Jimmy Butler, number 1 on DraftKings, 41.6%. Michael Porter Jr., number 2 projected owned player on DraftKings at 37%. And as always, you can get these for yourself at Osmo.com/join. Number 3, Bam Adebayo, 34%. Number 4, Big Bob Covington, 32%. And number 5, Yusuf Nurkic at 31%. Greg, any of these guys stand out to you? And Robert Covington, are we all ready to jump off this ledge together? I feel like we're leading a suicide cult with Robert Covington.
I'm overweight to the field on that Robert Covington number because I just don't know where else to go with value reliably today. And Robert Covington's going to get minutes that other cheap guys aren't going to get today. So I'm fine with Robert Covington. Actually, I don't think any of these are egregious. I'm underweight to the field on that Michael Porter Jr. number, but it's really just because my lineups are setting up to be, pretty heavy stars and scrubs for this slate. If we're calling Robert Covington a scrub, which I think most of the chat would agree with that at this point. So that kind of leaves some of the guys like Michael Porter Jr., Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday. They become lower priority plays when I'm trying to get to the likes of Robert Covington and Monty Morris to pay up for, the guys like Giannis.
Also, we just got the Heat starters. We'll get to the FanDuel top 5 in a second, but this is actually interesting. Goran Dragic starting. It's Dragic, Butler, Robinson, Ariza, Adebayo. So that is one wrinkle here where none, maybe that ownership less valuable, but he was still only projected for 10%. But none getting second unit run potentially. I guess there is the risk here that he could just get squeezed out of the rotation. Maybe they do some things go into a Tyler Hero, or who knows what they could do in that second unit. Iguodala, some way to steal some minutes as well. But Dragic being a starter, I feel extra good about the asinine amount of Goran Dragic I'm going to have today.
Yeah, that gives him a couple of minutes. Don't be surprised if Kendrick Nunn plays 0 minutes today with this news now, because if you remember the Heat's rotation in the playoffs last year when Dragic was starting, Nunn fell out of the rotation entirely. There was one game where somebody got hurt, Nunn stepped into the rotation, Rinpak won all the GPPs that night because he had but he had a handful of Kendrick Nunn lineups for showdown purposes. But I mean, I think that there's not a high percentage chance, but there is a sliver of a chance that Kendrick Nunn plays 0 minutes today.
And here's a reasonable question from Josh Baker in the YouTube chat real fast. Is Dragic starting hurt or help his usage with the starters? That's something we do talk about sometimes with the second unit guys, but the difference is that Dragic always maintains the high usage on the year. He's playing enough with these groups, including guys like Butler and Bam Adebayo. So it's not like he's playing separately in different rotations. They stagger the minutes enough, but he's still at a 25% usage rate all year long. And it's a do or die game, and Dragic is one of very few qualified shooters and playmakers they have. So I think Dragic, I would have no issue about any sort of change there, unless you feel differently at all, Greg.
No, and the other thing to add here is that he wasn't playing a ton of minutes before, and the minutes upside that he brings coming into the starting lineup, it adds a lot. So game 1, an overtime game, he ended up playing 35 minutes, but that was 30 minutes in regulation last game because of a blowout. He played 24 minutes. Now that he's starting, I'd expect, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 32, 34, maybe even 35 minutes out of Goran Dragic. So even if there is a slight downtick in usage, it's definitely offset by the 5 or so extra minutes he's going to play.
And a similar question from somebody else in chat, from Les Gray in chat, asking us, Dragic hurt Butler? I don't think he hurts Butler. I think at this point, Butler needs the help on the court. Butler's been playing a little bit. I don't know. People are saying he's been hurt. I don't know if that's the case as much as he's just been really getting crowded and jammed and playing just terribly, not shooting the ball that well, especially in that game 1. But I do think Dragic, to me, like, he opens things up for Butler a little more. Like, he's probably going to lose a little bit in the way of assists. But Butler just needs help at this point. And Dragic is a steady hand who's been doing this long enough. And he's probably going to play an abundance of minutes today. So I don't think he hurts Butler. I think he actually, Butler's price point is really the main thing too, where at Butler's price tag, like, you could put, I don't even know, you could put Tyler Hero out there and I still wouldn't think anybody really hurts Butler that much.
Yeah, and the other thing too is Jimmy Butler, he might not come off the court today. I mean, he might play because what are they playing for if they lose today? So I mean, to me, Jimmy Butler, I would be shocked if Jimmy Butler plays under 40 minutes.
Yep, I would agree. I think this is, it's do or die time. Keep that in mind for these games too. Make sure you're aware of the series, where it stands. If it's a 1-1, a 2-0, a 3-0, because when these teams, especially the 3-0 one, teams do not like to get down 3-0 because there's no pathway for that for the most part to actually win a series like that. So that's why the Heat pulling out the big guns today, starting Goran Dragic. Top 5 on FanDuel real fast. CJ McCollum, 45% is going to be number 1 projected owned player. Jimmy Butler, number 2 at 42.4. Number 3, old Big Bob Covington. Bobby Covington. What's the nickname for Robert Covington? I feel like we need to make him a friend now in the hopes that he doesn't kill us all today.
Well, so I'll go to basketball, because Basketball Reference has some really wonky nicknames for players. Some of them are really funny. Like, that's where I found out that Gary Payton's son is nicknamed the Mitten, was just by going to a Basketball Reference. But let's see. We got Lord Covington. Glovington, I guess that's not bad, but Lord Covington.
Love Glovington.
None of these are great. I wish I had, if something came to me really quick that I thought was clever, I'd throw it out, but I have nothing. And I'm just gonna sit here thinking for the next couple of minutes just to throw out some crappy, terrible nickname. But I'm good with Glovington.
Bobby Cubs is what I would call him. I feel like that makes him sound like somebody you'd hang out with De Niro back in the day. And that's how I'm going to treat Robert Covington. A different man today is what we're hoping from him. Number 4 on FanDuel, Devin Booker at 39% expected ownership. And number 5, Dante DiVincenzo, a rounded up 38% for him. So those are your top 5s on there. And again, make sure to use not the promo code. Make sure to go to Osmo.com/join and don't use any promo codes, as there aren't any right now. But for NBA, it's going to pay for itself, especially with the data you need right now for the playoffs. Ownership crucial. The projections crucial as always. And of course, the boom bust tool still going for all these slates as well. So make sure you're checking that out at Osmo.com/join. Let's talk about Chris Paul. This is something that I have to give full credit to our boy Eric Lindquist, who was on the Live Before Lock show with him the other day. He dug his heels in all day long about his strategic approach. It wasn't really a gut check or a gut feel thing or anything. To talk about Chris Paul, the risk with him, and that Campaign has basically been playing the backups of both Chris Paul and Devin Booker in the series so far. Campaign got their last game, and I think with the price tag for Campaign coming up, the ownership for him coming up as well, I feel like the logical move is to play more Chris Paul. I'm taking instead the illogical move and just getting a little bit less in the field of Campaign. I didn't get much of Chris Paul. But Greg, are you willing to get Chris Paul on a day where the shoulder looked terrible? He played less minutes last game. It was a deliberate move by Monty Williams, it seemed. But if he's healthier today, you got to think Chris Paul can really upset everybody who's playing Campaign.
Yeah, so there was some really useful information we got in our premium Slack chat from some tweets that News got it dug up. So he had posted a thing, I want to say it was like 20 minutes before the game started. There was a video circulating. Chris Paul couldn't take his shirt off in warmups yesterday. Like, he was physically unable to because his shoulder was bothering him so much. And that was a pretty big red flag for me. There aren't weird things that happen pregame like that will usually cause me to change my exposures to players. I went from pretty heavy on Chris Paul to almost none of Chris Paul and upping Campaign just based on a player being unable to take his shirt off. But it was a thing that made sense to me because there was a lot of questions about how healthy Chris Paul was, and there were some indications that he was really not very healthy. So as of right now, I'm taking a pretty overweight approach to Chris Paul on DraftKings. He's actually really oddly owned way differently on FanDuel and DraftKings. We have him sub 10% on FanDuel, but sub 10% on DraftKings. FanDuel, though, we have Chris Paul paying almost 30% ownership. So he's a vastly different play on the two sites. Looking at those numbers, I definitely want to be overweight to the field on DraftKings at 10%, but with the caveat that I'm waiting for more information also. I'm going to look for whatever kind of information we get from beat reporters about how he looks in layup lines. I think it's important for today. It seems stupid, except when we get reports that like, hey, we've got the star point guard who wasn't able to dribble with his right hand at the end of game 1, wasn't able to take his shirt off before game 2 because of his shoulder issue. I mean, that was a red flag that he wasn't totally healthy. And I tend to think he's going to be healthier today, but I'm not totally sold on it.
I just think it's funny in a vacuum to be like, yeah, Greg made his decision about Chris Paul based upon how willing or able Chris Paul was to get nude in this particular.
Yeah, hey,
situation.
listen. Do you know it's about time one of those DMs athletes paid off? Because I've been for years I've been telling him like, dude, could you just take your shirt off? And now look at it's finally paying dividends. We got campaign that was probably worth a total of like $18 of ROI to me last.
I just imagine 100 DMs you'd be like, can you take your shirt off, Chris? Can you take your shirt off, Chris? And then today he like the other day he just replies, no, sad face. That's it. And that's where you make all the money. Dom and Nolan in the YouTube chat all saying they called him RoboCov in Minneapolis, which is fun though. I don't know if he's quite as good of a shooter as RoboCop was. That guy missed nothing. We got one question here in the Slack that we didn't hit on, and I feel like this is one that people are very curious about, always the correlation plays, and I think they get a little more important when it's showdown season and you're really worrying about those finals games and all that. He's asking, are Covington and Nurkic negatively correlated? I think you could sort of make that connection based upon how they're playing, Nurkic getting more minutes, but to me, realistically, like Nurkic is the bad issue for Covington in this series is that he's expending everything defensively. He's covering Michael Porter Jr. He's chasing him around a lot. He's covering really a lot of guys on the wing. He's sometimes switching on to Jokic. Like he's doing a lot of stuff here. That to me is why Covington's having issues. But Greg, I don't know if you feel differently here, but I don't see any reason why you'd be like, oh, I can't play Covington and Nurkic together because they're negatively correlated.
No, especially not on this particular slate and what their price points are. So Covington, let's see, what was his price for most of the season? I think, I mean, as much as people like to think that Covington sucks and isn't a good fantasy asset, 2 weeks ago, he was 5,600 and he's been priced as high as 6,400 this season. So, I mean, this is a pretty big markdown from where we typically see Covington priced. He's only had a handful of games this year where he was even priced below 5,000. So you have to consider the price. And then also that Nurkic is a really good points per minute fantasy producer. He's not priced nearly appropriately enough in my opinion. So with the prices are for both of them, maybe, there's a little negative correlation in terms of, hey, if one guy blocks a shot, the other guy doesn't, somebody grabs a rebound, the other doesn't, but given what the prices are, it's a non-issue.
Yeah, I think that their negative correlation is basically as much as like any negative correlation would be normally for players, where they're all going to pull a little bit from each other. But I just wouldn't have an issue with it on the slate. Sam Van Dam, this is a funny super chat, saying, I watched nude, ! DK GPP, single bullet, none versus hero for best second team run with Dragic starting. I think at this point, I would take my shot. I don't love it for a single bullet, but I would take my shot at Tyler Hero. I just think there's a pathway for him to get run today. And it's desperate times, desperate measures to me. That's why I would go Hero over none. But Greg, how do you feel for a single bullet for a naked man and a DK GPP?
Yeah. It does matter that he's naked also. That's going to impact my decision a little bit here because you don't want to disappoint somebody.
He's
like
vulnerable.
That, but,
yeah, I think that's...
Yeah. No. I hate disappointing somebody when they're naked. But so I'm gonna go with Tyler Hero, especially because before when I was talking about Kendrick Nunn being out of the starting lineup, I think there's a chance he plays 0 minutes today. That's a pretty big concern for me right now. Him just falling out of the rotation entirely. I wouldn't be surprised if Andre Iguodala ends up picking up a few extra minutes, also just given the nature of this game, and they might be going to their vets so they trust a little bit more when you see Goran Dragic is starting. So. Yeah, I'm gonna go towards Hero there. I don't like either of them all that much, but I really dislike Kendrick Nunn now.
Let's talk about the rest of the Suns here because I think there are some plays. Well, one player that could be sort of contingent on Chris Paul, and I think he looks good on his surface anyway, so I don't mind going there. But Devin Booker to me seems like a play that could get more appealing if Paul's just limited, or if Paul's limited but plays more runs, so he's kind of hurting campaign, but still not able to do enough of what he's going to do. Devin Booker to me, I'm with the field on him. I actually kind of wish I'd gone a little bit more, but I think as a play, to me, there's a lot of logic going to Booker, kind of like what we saw yesterday with Mike Conley, where Mitchell was banged up. Conley ended up getting a little bit extra time because of Mitchell having to go to the locker room, and then was just more productive because of Mitchell just not being where he needed to be. I think Devin Booker's in that same spot today. So to me, he's the guy to try to get with the field on. Looks like he'll be about 25% on DraftKings and 39% on Fanduel.
Yeah, and the FanDuel ownership, like I don't love the price point on Devin Booker, but this is another thing where we talked about, I don't like the price point on Dante DiVincenzo. I think CJ McCollum is overall the top shooting guard play on FanDuel, but you just look at other choices we have there, and it's hard to get away from Devin Booker because there's only a handful of shooting guard options that are somewhat viable on FanDuel. So I agree with you. I think Devin Booker, even at that kind of ownership, FanDuel, somebody I want to get to. DraftKings, I prefer to pay up for the guys like Jokic, Giannis, and Damian Lillard. But I don't have an issue with trying to even yourself with the field of Booker, because if Chris Paul is actually going to be limited again, then Booker is going to have to do a lot to keep the Suns in the game.
And then I need to mention DeAndre, and I talked about him briefly, but to me, he is a play that I'm kind of surprised he's not getting more ownership. Certainly some chance he could get into foul trouble, but he's projected to be in the optimal lineup over 40% of the time from Osmo, but still on DraftKings it says, but it's projected for 30% ownership on DK, 16% on FanDuel it looks like. And Ayton, to me, the minutes have been very secure. Again, there is that little bit of risk to him, but he's been super productive, ripping rebounds at the same rate that he has all year long anyway, which has been his main asset. He's not getting as much usage this year, but there's certainly a pathway for him to do more there. Ayton, to me, is one of the best center plays. I mean, I think we've had pretty much overall in the playoffs, and I think he's still there for me at his price tag. How are you feeling about DeAndre Ayton? And I guess, is he a core play for you relative to his ownership?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised he isn't picking up more ownership. I know that he's still, fairly popular, but under 30%, I actually think he's probably somebody who warrants 40+% ownership, just given the increased role that we've seen him play. And also the way he's getting his stats, it's in diverse ways. He scores a little bit. He's getting rebounds, block shots. So you put all that together, and it's not like it's a thing where, if Ayton isn't scoring, he has just a bad fantasy game, especially at this kind of price point. It's just a little bit too low considering the recent production for him. So I actually think that his ownership warrants being higher.
Yep, I'm on the same page with you. Talk about the Lakers real fast. We got LeBron, Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis maybe going to spike some more ownership because of the big day that he had last time out, but about as volatile as he's always been all year long. We've seen that with just game one and game two. LeBron, to me, the more steady play. I have no issue getting tournament exposure to either, though. I did get more of LeBron because I do think going Anthony Davis takes you away from Giannis, and we've talked enough about Giannis, why we're going there. That's how I'm handling it today, Greg. But what are you doing with the Lakers' big two of LeBron and Anthony Davis?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but I don't really like either of them all that much. I prioritize just the way that I look at my projections. Giannis is a higher priority. Jokic is a higher priority. Damian Lillard's a higher priority. Unless there's some situation where all of a sudden I can play 1,000 lineups and just play everybody, I have to make the cut somewhere. And it's not going to be me forcing LeBron and AD into my lineups when there's just other guys that project better.
Yep, we're on the same page there, and I feel like we're going to be on the same page with Andre Drummond, Dennis Schroeder. You mentioned your Marc Gasol take earlier in the show. Schroeder not really affected by Marc Gasol, obviously, but I do think that last game, to me, just was a little bit of an outlier for Schroeder. And Drummond, I think, the minutes maybe can get there, but he's only getting a 22-minute projection from the Osmo data folks right now. And I do feel like that's one, to me, that I don't feel fantastic about him really topping that number. And I agree with your take that, Gasol can still earn more minutes. I think there's still some world where they just go to Harrell if things are not working in any capacity, though. At this point, that does seem like a lower probability outcome than the Gasol one. But I think either way, Drummond, to me, just relying on him just seems like a risky move. And the field will still not be on him that much. So are you getting any Drummond, Schroeder, I guess KCP, any of the peripheral Lakers parts?
I'm not really. Let me look at my exposures here. But off the top of my head, I think the Lakers are the team I have the least amount of exposure to overall. A lineup here or there with Schroeder. I have a couple of Drummond lineups, but I think the Lakers are the worst team to target on tonight's slate.
Yeah, and it scares me. I certainly think there's some tournament upside. If you are a risk taker, maybe playing more Lakers might be a good move. But in terms of just running an optimizer, it's hard to really get these guys to surface in a meaningful way. And I think maybe if you took one in lineups, like I did get a little bit of KCP because of that price point that I talked about with Covington. And we've talked about all show, basically. Covington, Monty Morris on DraftKings, those guys in the same range. Caldwell Pope, to me, is a pivot for a little bit of ownership to get to that same price tag that makes the lineup construction that I like work. But I think, to me, it's tough to get there, and that maybe gives them some tournament appeal. But you're taking on a good amount of risk because these guys just don't project as well from a value perspective as a lot of the other guys on the slate. Let's talk a little bit more about one chalk play that I don't think we've hit on very much today. I talked about Michael Porter Jr., my thoughts for him. I think he's going to be better in a game that I'd expect to be more competitive than that last one where Denver put it down. And that was the expectation. I thought Porter Jr. would contribute more to the blowout there, but he didn't quite get there. Only put up 13 shots in that game. But Greg, Porter Jr. chalk today. Are you going back to Porter Jr. at a price tag that still just seems too low based on the median projection?
No. So I think we kind of briefly talked about him before we were talking about the ownership, and I don't think he's a bad play on a points per dollar basis, but I'm underweight to the field on him just because the way my lineups are shaking up, where when I'm going really heavy stars and scrubs, there just ends up being those kind of like upper mid-tier price guys like Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Michael Porter Jr. I just don't end up getting a lot of exposure to them. So that's ultimately why I'm a little bit underweight to the field on Michael Porter Jr. I do think that of that grouping, though, those guys who are kind of priced around there, Michael Porter Jr., Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, I think Porter is the best play of the group, but I'm still a little bit underweight to him.
And we got to talk a little more about Jokic, because Jokic is a player who, unfortunately, to me, suffered at the amount of love that I have for Giannis today. And it does scare me a little bit, because Jokic certainly capable of being either the part that drives everything for Denver in a game that's competitive against Portland, or just being the thing that initiates a blowout if they do somehow run away one more time from Portland here, even though it's a road game and they are a 3-point dog here. But I do think Jokic played, to me, that 21% ownership for him. Like, I like Giannis a lot more, but I think I should have done more. I'm not going to do it at this point with where we are in the show, but like getting more Jokic and just hedging a bit on the Giannis ownership seems logical. But what ratio of ownership did you get for Jokic? Because he's projected for under 25% on Fanduel, closer to 20% on Draftkings. And it does seem low for Jokic, even though I think we are on the same page that Giannis just is the better play on paper.
Yeah, I'm about even with the field on Jokic, just because I'm heavy on Giannis. I'm way overweight to the field on him. And you just kind of run out of salary cap and roster spots then to be able to play somebody like Jokic, especially because there's a little bit of crossover on DraftKings where Giannis has power forward and center eligibility. A little bit handcuffed. I mean, when you could only play him at center. So there's other center plays we've talked about, like Nurkic is a good center play. Kind of briefly talked about him, but not really in depth. We both like DeAndre Ayton, and you just kind of get to a point where I don't think the optimal lineups have Jokic in them.
You crunching hard, Greg? I feel like you're getting a little robot-y on those. You're going to turn on to RoboCov, I guess.
I was actually just, was it like I don't know if you saw what happened on the baseball show the other day, but for some reason my sound cut off while I was talking, and then it came back, but it all came back at the same time. So just all my words came out at the exact same time. I was talking about Rich Hill at like a million miles per hour. And by the way, I couldn't have been more wrong about Rich Hill that day either. So almost better that the words kind of got unlistenable too. But yeah, I was actually just running lineups, my final run of them, but I'm done with that now. So maybe that should help.
So basically you were just talking in that one moment because of technical difficulties. Like I talk every single day. So that's good to know. I'm glad you got to experience it for once. The rest of the Nuggets here, we talked about Monty Morris enough. I think we gave our take here. I'll spare it for the sake of time that Monty Morris, a good value play again today. The minutes keep being there for him. I have no issue being with the field, maybe even above it today. Austin Rivers, I think to me looks less appealing at this point with his minutes seemingly getting a bit less secure. Marcus Howard, somebody that I did get to a little bit, which is kind of crazy because I did speak ill of Bryn Forbes, but the price tag does work for Howard in particular. And I think that was something I got to enough to mention it that I will be with the field on the 6% projected ownership that way. But other Nuggets, Greg, besides, I guess, Monty Morris, who we talked about, unless you want to give a take on him one more, you get any significant amounts of these guys who aren't Nikola Jokic or Michael Porter Jr. or Monty Morris?
Let's see. Other Denver guys. I don't think Paul Millsap is a bad play for the slate. He's somebody who we've seen at times Denver when they kind of need a veteran presence. They don't have an issue with leaning on Paul Millsap a little bit, just because he is somebody who, over the last few years, he's definitely not what he used to be, but it's not like he's terrible anymore. I think just his age and health kind of prevents him from playing bigger extended minutes. But if you look at what he did last game, where he scored over 30 fantasy points in just 15 minutes, given the kind of production they got from the series being even at 1-1, I think that he's somebody who could potentially end up gaining a little bit of playing time here. So coming off a really strong game last time out, I think he could be a little bit more of a higher in the rotation. So Millsap as a lower owned play, I think makes sense.
We got a super chat here from Corey Balmer asking Drew Holiday and Nurkic. And if you guys have super chats, get them in because we're probably going to finish with a little bit of time here to take a few. Drew Holiday and Nurkic or DiVincenzo and Dame for a DK GPP. Man, that's a tough one. I think I would go DiVincenzo and Dame personally, but Greg, if you had to choose Holiday and Nurkic or DiVincenzo and Dame for a DK GPP.
Yeah, so of these guys, the player I have the most exposure to is Nurkic. However, I don't really like Drew Holiday at his price point. Actually, I'm going to go with Drew Holiday and Nurkic just because it's really close, actually. I don't even think I project them all that differently if you add them all together, but I'll lean towards Holiday Nurkic just because Nurkic is my overall favorite play of the combination.
And we got a non-super chat here, but I think a reasonable question from Branson Cummins asking Cam Johnson takes. I think the take for Cam Johnson is that if you're not playing Covington, going to Cam Johnson's sort of the most logical move in terms of price points at the position. But Cam Johnson, to me, not somebody who projects that well. You need him to really heat up from three in a way that I don't see to be the most likely. But Greg, did you get any Cam Johnson for yourself today?
I have a little bit of exposure to him, mostly because he really outplayed Sarge in a significant way last game. And I think there's a pretty good chance that Sarge's minutes go more towards Cam Johnson today. Cam Johnson is just better. And also he brings the things to the table that I think the Suns need in this matchup, especially if there's a chance that Chris Paul isn't totally healthy. They're going to need to get a little more variance in the game. And the way you do that is put your best 3-point shooters out on the court. And Cam Johnson is one of them. So Cam Johnson did play 27 minutes last game. And even if it didn't equate to a whole bunch of fantasy production, Sarge was absolutely miserable on both ends of the court last game. So I prefer Cam Johnson. I think there's a little bit of minutes upside there.
And let's talk more about Portland. We've hit on CJ McCollum and Robert Covington enough, I think, but Damian Lillard's a guy that we have breezed past a little. And I guess it's something just real fast. Do you think Damian Lillard's the most exciting man in the NBA? I know they were debating that on the deeper dive right before us.
What was it that Damian Lillard's the most exciting player in the NBA?
Yep.
No, it's Steph Curry for me.
That's exactly what I was thinking, and I was baffled they didn't get there, but I think that's who it has to be.
Because Steph Curry is
Wait, what, Jordan?
Go.
Oh, was that okay? Okay.
Okay. So yeah, if I mean, I would still go something off the board, like because I like the really obscure players. So I mean, to me, it's like Boban. Right, because Boban, like what's more fun than Boban coming on the court?
LaMelo?
Yeah, I think Boban would actually be my answer.
I'm going to throw LaMelo in the mix because I feel like even seeing him, some of the plays he had, obviously he's not in the mix anymore, but I would throw LaMelo in a little bit early, a little premature for him. But I think LaMelo with the plays, like Steph is the obvious one. So I guess if we're taking him out of the mix, I think LaMelo's got the best shots on seat Dame. But I have no issue with Dame to tie it all back together. He is exciting for good reason. He's a guy who can jack up a three from half court at any time. And he's just a fun guy to watch, certainly, and is going to be a key part of what Portland does today. That said, he is a victim of my price tags going elsewhere, going to more Giannis, going to more Jimmy Butler, going to some of the guys we talked about throughout the show, where Dame certainly can break the slate in a meaningful way, Greg, and I am terrified to not have enough of him, but I am going to have less in the field of him today. So where did you land with Lillard?
Yeah, I'm underweight to the field on him. He's definitely somebody I would have liked to have gotten to more, but ultimately I prioritize Giannis ahead of him. I prioritize Jokic slightly ahead of him. And so he's my third favorite spend up option. I ran into that same issue the other day where we had Giannis, Jokic, and Dame on the slate together. So no issue if people prefer Dame, but for me, I just project Giannis so well that I have to prioritize him highly, and that's going to pinch some of the other options. But getting back to the most fun player in the league to watch, because I'm still hung up on this, like what's more fun than Boban coming into the game, especially if you play him in DFS? Like it's because he could just go out and he could end up scoring like 20 fantasy points in 3 minutes. I don't know, I just have the most fun viewing experience is Boban coming into a game. And also it's unexpected. You don't know when it's going to happen. And then all of a sudden it happens like, oh my God, Boban's here. Or, 10 minutes before lock, Boban's starting. Oh, it's a Boban night. Like there isn't other things like that. It generates the same sort of buzz in our circle.
I think they were talking about it more from like the real life perspective of it, but I get from the DFS perspective. I think that's fair though. Like from a real life perspective, watching Boban play is like watching a giraffe version of Andre Drummond play. And I feel like that's maybe not inherently exciting, but I'm with you on it. Scoops in the premium Slack asking for a Fanduel single entry GPP, Monty Morris and Powell or Campazzo and Mikal Bridges. That's an interesting one. I'll let you take that one first, Greg, because I think you're playing a little on Fanduel today.
All right. So was that in?
Yes, premium
okay, here, just so I have it pulled up right now. Yeah, from Scoop. So Monty Morris and Powell or Campazzo and Bridges. Let me just look at my exposure, and then I could see which of these guys that I ultimately have the most exposure to. All right. Well, very limited. Campazzo. It's the Morris and Powell side.
It would be Morris and Powell for me too. I have a lot more of these guys, but if you have a really chalky lineup elsewhere, I do think that Morris and Powell make a lot of lineups work on both sites today. So I think, if the rest of the lineup is chalk, I think I might be inclined to go the other way, but just for the actual projections, it should be Morris and that Morris grouping by a pretty wide margin. Let's see. Any final questions? Nothing else great here. People doing fake news. None is not starting. To be clear, it is Goran Dragic starting. people calling the Pope names for some reason. Okay. Any final takes here, Greg? Anybody that we didn't mention? I feel like Powell, we didn't hit on enough. Powell, to me, another guy who makes lineups work, as I just mentioned. Nurkic, same thing. I feel like we've talked about these guys throughout the course of the show, but anybody else that you haven't mentioned that you just want to put a flag in to just say that, hey, I said this guy on the show and I'm playing him?
I have Anthony Simons in my player pool more than anything, just due to the price point and that he's actually playing minutes. He has a somewhat stable role in the rotation right now. Obviously, the minutes upside isn't going to be 30 or anything like that, playing behind CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, but we did see him play 23 minutes in the first game of the series. So just given that that's on the table for him and his price point nearly min price, is DraftKings specific play, I think that he's worth getting a little bit of exposure to, just because he opens up possibilities in terms of lineup construction.
All right. If you guys are listening right now, you have probably about minutes, if not, 1 minute, if not seconds left until lock. So make sure to get those lineups in. Please do that now. Shout out to chat as well. We appreciate all you guys being here. I'm checking to see if there's anything interesting. Spencer Neal asking any 3K play on DK. No, there are enough $3,100 ones. Anthony Simon, to Greg just mentioned, I also have him in my player pool and to get some exposure there too. Talked about Marcus Howard. He's another guy you could play a little bit of. Greg suggested Marcus Sol earlier at 3,200, but nobody, and then you do have Bryn Forbes as well. If you are a person who believes there, we did mention him and Dwayne Dedmon as guys who certainly the field will be on a little bit more, and you can get there, but not priority plays by any stretch. So that's as close as it gets. Nobody at 3K flat. Greg, did you play any 3K flat guys, just out of curiosity?
I have a couple lineups with Iguodala, just because once we saw Kendrick Nunn not starting before, I've mentioned this a couple of times, I think there's a chance that Nunn plays 0 minutes tonight. And with that being a possibility, I think we would see Iguodala play a few more minutes. I think that Goran Dragic starting, it's a little bit of a signal to me that the Heat are going to be relying on their veterans today. Maybe seeing Andre Iguodala play upwards of 20 minutes would be the most surprising thing in the world to me. And by no means is Iguodala a good fantasy producer, but the field isn't really on him. He's cheap. He opens up some lineup possibilities. So Iguodala will be the one 3K flat guy who I think would be worth at least a look at.
All right. So close us out, Greg, with your plugs for the day. I know you have a lot of people who should be following you on Twitter. So give the people the handle and anything else that you want to plug right now.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at GEhrenbergS, and plug a good game from Giannis tonight. Because he's what's going to make or break my day. I really need Giannis to outscore Jokic, Damian Lillard, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis today.
And I will say that I am really going to give my plug to Bobby Covs, Robert Covington, really hoping this guy comes through. And if not, hey, we talked about how he's shit today, but sometimes he's got to play the shit to make it work. So that is my take on the day. Follow at G Ehrenberg DFS. Follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Osmo_com. All the content we do on there funnels through that Twitter handle, as well as a lot of flash giveaways. Sometimes we don't even get to mention them on the show. So go make sure you follow at Osmo_com. Shout out to Prize Picks as well. Play on there. Use that promo code Osmo to get your $100 deposit match. Great site to play on. And if you're tired of worrying about the ownership game and all of that, you don't have to do that on Prize Picks. You're just playing against the players themselves and your own projections and all of that. So go check those out and hit that like button before you go, guys. We'll see you guys again soon. Enjoy your nights and good luck.